2. 1, 2. Okay, 2. 1, 2. Hey, hey. 1, 2. Hey, hey. Hey, yeah.
Do you want us to go live and like keep the people cooking rather than just sitting in the room watching the screen, or you all need time still? Yeah, well, it's 9 o'clock. She's there. You ready? Velma Jessamy is the keynote. What do I need to do to make her speak? She's in the room.
Oh, she should have
Panelist.
been on the panelist.
Yeah, she needs to. She's used the wrong link.
Yeah, she needs to be in the panel for her to speak.
She used the wrong link.
Where her? And we're not getting any option for her to.
No.
Yeah, she needs to be on the panel because the attendees can only see.
come up as a panelist? Where's the... Pollinators. Mm. Yeah, I'm actually on live now trying to sort out a few problems. There is a link. Just go to the ACBO website. You'll get the link there. Go online, my brother. Go on. I'm online trying to run the conference now. I can't really talk now. All right, cool. All right. Yeah. Okay. I think it's
And can you hear me now?
okay, we got you. Yeah, I can hear you.
You need to give me permission to start the video.
Yes, Dr. Jessamy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. Can you turn on your video, please?
It says that you need to,
No, you will have access to it. We can't. No.
it says
Okay, let me check the
the
meeting.
host
Okay.
has stopped.
1 second. Somebody's going to check the meeting session. 1 moment, please. Hi, everybody online. Please, could you bear patience with us? We're just having a little bit of a technical moment, but we should have it resolved momentarily. So please bear patience with me. Thank you.
So somewhere in there, you should be able to ask me to start my video.
Yes, we do. The tech team is looking at it now. Can she, Richmond, can she just share her screen? Queue up your present PowerPoint presentation and share screen for us while we organize the video by the time, if that's possible.
Okay. But it's saying that you have disabled both video and the share screen. So it's,
One
the
moment.
host needs to give me video permission.
Okay, so the tech team's rectifying that now.
Somewhere in your settings, you need to give me video permission.
Going to edit. My laptop is muted. It's muted.
It's this one.
Yeah, it's muted.
No, the sound on it.
Inconvenience, but just give us 2 minutes. I'm sorry. just you could do it from. But that was not the time for that. That was not the. Okay, resolved. We need to go and check that feature for everybody else proceeding.
It's done for all panelists.
All globally? All right.
All panelists. All panelists, yeah?
All right, cool. So we can log back in again?
Yeah.
What a disaster.
It was the first one, everything should flow smoothly from here. And Richard, just one more thing, your presentation.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Okay. Once we get this one in flow, we'll deal with that. Are we there yet?
We just need her to join now.
Okay, so.
So we're there.
Okay.
Once she joins, we can go. She needs to come back in.
Okay, I just sent her a message. She just read it. Anybody else joining back in yet?
Your attendees are there.
Okay. They probably never left.
Anybody else who's presenting for the morning needs to be on the panel. Okay, she's back. We got video. Brilliant. Okay, Richard.
Yep.
Take it away. Tell her to unmute and let's begin.
Okay. You can unmute me.
Do you want to introduce and say a short?
Yeah. Well, just get me in.
It's perfectly sure. No. He just needs to introduce, and he will get to his presentation during the finish. Okay, we have him. Yeah. Okay, nice. Introduce us.
Can I speak?
Just a second. No, Richard. No. On the computer that you have,
Yep.
turn off video and audio. We will do everything for you. We are your hands and eyes.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, we ready? Good morning, everybody. Good morning, St. Lucia. Good morning, everybody in the region. My apologies for the slightly delayed start, but we are now fully operational and functional. I'd like to first welcome Dr. Velma Jessamy, all the way from Grenada. Many thanks for your patience. I do apologize once again for the delay. And I'm not going to take up any more of anybody's time because we're already 24 minutes late behind schedule. So I'm going to pass you directly straight on to Dr. Jessamy to start her presentation. Thank you, Dr. Jessamy, and welcome and good morning.
Welcome to my garden, Jessamine Eden. Good morning, everyone. We were hoping to do this outside, but it was a little rainy this morning. so you can't see our bee yard right behind me. Thank you so much, Richard, Mr. Matthias, and Agbo, all of the team who have worked to make this 10th Caribbean Beekeeping Congress possible. Of course, we are doing this virtually because of the global pandemic, and we have some honey COVID news to share today. I will go straight into my presentation if the host will give me permission to share my screen. Mr. Matthias?
I'm with you, yeah, I'm with you. You should have permissions already. The tech team worked on everything, so I should not have to intervene at all. Yes, you can go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. So today I want to speak to you and get your input on what I term a 21st century framework for apiculture in the Caribbean. Of course, I am Valma Jessamy, and today I'm speaking to you as the principal research scientist for 17 21st Century Cures Limited. That's one of the businesses or companies that I direct and work with a group of dynamic scientists from all over the world, India, the USA, the UK, and here in the Caribbean. So very quickly, I'll go through a history of apiculture in the Caribbean. It's not very thorough, but it gives you a global as to how apiculture got started in the region, and you might be able to fill in some of the gaps, some of the current trends, global and in the region, and to stimulate us to think of a more systematic approach of how apiculture is done here in the region, talk a bit about our medicinal plants. Can we find or have a Caribbean manuka? What kind of research, innovation, science, and technology we should be thinking about, and some future directions. So I'll try to do this very quickly and entertain any questions you may have. Now, quite a bit of the work is copyrighted. I'll try to share as much as possible. I have completed 2 publications, which will be available when we launch our products in the new year. The first one, The Accidental Beekeeper, it gives a year in the life of a Caribbean apiary. Now, I started beekeeping by accident when a huge swarm of bees came into my garden here in Grenada. And so that's how we got started. And over the last 12 years, I've spent my time literally chasing honeybees. And this led me to a volume of work on the plants that the honeybee was feeding on. And so the second publication is the Medicinal Wild Honey Plants of the Caribbean. And that has a lot of implications for this 21st century approach that I am proposing to you today. So when I speak about the Caribbean, I am referring to the entire circum-Caribbean. Most of us here today are from the OCS, but we have people represented from all around the world and the region. So all of the countries that the Caribbean Sea borders are included in this grouping of Caribbean states, starting from Belize to the Bahamas. We come all around to the Caribbean coastline of Suriname, Guyana, Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras. I had the privilege to visit most of these regions over the past 20 years in my work as an environmental scientist and as a beekeeper. So I've been able to map the ecoregions that are important for beekeeping throughout the region, and to look at what are some of the plants that are important and which shape the chemistry of Caribbean honey. And that in itself is a whole big conversation. If we look at a global map of bees and the different types of bees, there are about 6 different zones for honeybees. The first one, zone 1, is mainly the indigenous temperate zone of the Apis mellifera races. Zone 2, the indigenous tropical zone of Apis mellifera races. That's, we're looking at Africa. Zone 3, we have the indigenous Apis cerana, dorsata, etc. And the next zone of indigenous bees are the stingless bees, which are mainly in the tropical band, north and south of the equator. When we talk about honeybees, Apis mellifera in our region, we are actually talking about introduced Apis mellifera. And that, of course, includes the Caribbean region. In South America, we also had introduced temperate zone Apis mellifera. We actually see records which show that bees were introduced to Suriname and South America via the Caribbean. We also have introduced European species in Australia and some of that were reintroduced into zone 3. And the final big introduction, we talk about Africanized honeybees, is when we had the introduction of tropical bees from Africa to South America and the eventual movement of those Africanized bees all through the Caribbean and up to North America. So there are many types of bees and pollinators which are endemic to the Caribbean and the tropics, but most of all native bees are stingless, and so their biology does not lend to manipulation for large-scale honey production. As I said earlier, the Apis mellifera was introduced into the Americas by European colonizers in the 17th century. And of course, now we have the Africanized Apis mellifera scaletta, which migrated up through the region. So honey production and hive management in the Caribbean is influenced by the subspecies of honeybees. And that's something that we'll come back to, which is very important. Here we have a quote from Patrick Brown, who's a medical doctor, writing on the natural and civil history of Jamaica in 1756, when he describes Apis mellifera oblonga. And he says, these useful insects have been frequently introduced to Jamaica. There are similar records for other islands in the Caribbean, Barbados, Grenada, and they had they had a lot of difficulty in managing the beehives. And so they had to be constantly reintroducing them and importing them. And part of the problem was ants, but there were other issues too. But there's this one man in Jamaica that Mr. Brown is speaking about here, who had a method which gave him quite a bit of success, and he had more than 60 hives. Now, honey was very important in the Caribbean. We often speak about honey for ancient cures, and we refer to other parts of the world and not here in the Caribbean. But if you look at the old manuscripts going back to the 15th, 16th century, 17th century, you would see where honey is used in many cures. In this particular essay, which was written in 1762, looking at the cures for diseases in the West Indies, honey is featured here. It's used together with a medicinal plant from the Caribbean in treating dysentery. And so after the person is purged and cleaned with the root of the plant, they're given a mixture of honey with water to help restore the healing of that person. So honey is very important. So we know that the revolution in modern beekeeping, which was because of Langstroth and his work with the movable frames, happened in 1876. And that also had an influence on beekeeping here in the Caribbean. And that's pretty much the method that most people use for beekeeping. So I'll just move forward to look at what are some of the current global trends. What we are seeing is that over the past 5 or more years, there's been a steady decline in the output of honey, even though there's been a steady increase in demand. And so that's an opportunity for countries who are exporting natural honey. The total global production of honey is about $2 billion, $1.9 billion, but that's down from $2.3 billion. So we've seen that there's been some overall decline in honey exports while we have an increase in demand. And there are many reasons for that, for that decline. And I would not go into that today, just to say that when we look at Latin America and the Caribbean, but excluding Mexico, the contribution to global export is about 13.5%. But here in the Caribbean, we are net importers of natural honey and honey value-added products. Beekeeping is dependent upon a narrow range of uncultivated native vegetation, and there is no strong link to agricultural farming systems. We have very low investment into apiculture, and the foraging habitats of the honeybees under threat from expansion of agricultural, tourism, residential, and infrastructure development activities. Some of the challenges have been addressed earlier. If you listen to the opening presentation by the Minister of Agriculture from St. Lucia, he spoke about some of the challenges. You have small-scale beekeeping. Most beekeepers in the region do not have any lands or are not linked to farming systems. There's a lack of innovation, science, and technology in beekeeping and in honey processing. We have to deal, of course, with environmental variability and the looming threat of climate change. And there's the lack of a coherent policy framework for apiculture. There's a lot of emphasis and talk about apiculture and the need to boost the apiculture sector in the Caribbean. Now, given those challenges, given that we're small, fragmented, low investment, why Caribbean honey? Why should we be so interested in the subject about apiculture and want to expand the sector? The advantages that we have, which we have not been talking about, is our high biodiversity of flowering medicinal plants, which bloom throughout the year. So the issue of seasonality could be managed if you are managing the food source for your honeybee. At present, the honey that we produce is multifloral. So there are several varietals. And in the photograph here, I have some of the varietals of honey from different parts of the island of Grenada that were extracted at different times of year. The other positive or advantage of Caribbean honey, because it's multifloral and from medicinal plants, the Caribbean honey has high bioactivity. So in speaking about a systems approach to apiculture, we need to shift from this nomadic type way of how beekeeping is done, where a farmer goes out on land that he more than likely does not own and set up his hives because of the type of vegetation in that area. We understand the limitations and challenges with that, because many times farmers are asked to move if they do not have permission to be on the land. You may have issues with spridia larceny, you have issues with pest and disease, not being able to monitor properly. You've got issues with lands being cleared for development. And also because some of those narrow ranges may not have a food source throughout the year, you have to deal with the issue of seasonality. Most beekeepers set up in the drier regions in all of the islands in the Caribbean. What I am proposing for this new approach is that we should start looking at beekeeping and apiculture as intimately linked with farming systems. In many countries, beekeeping supports agriculture, whether it's your orange groves, avocado, apples, and we know that that beekeepers move their apiaries around so that they can provide pollination services to farmers. And so there's this intimate link. When we start talking about bee health and worry about colony collapse, etc., it's because of this link between beekeeping and agriculture and those pollination services. So if you have problems with your honeybees, it means that you're going to see a decline in agricultural production. For us in the Caribbean, that link is not a strong one. And so we need to start developing that link between apiculture and agricultural farm systems. So take Jamaica, for instance. You have large plantations of coffee. The bees love coffee. Is there a link between the bee farmer and the coffee farmer? Or an avocado farm, or herbs and spices? Here in Grenada, our agriculture farm systems promote nutmeg, cocoa, soursop, etc. And none of these plants are pollinated by the honeybee, Apis mellifera. So as we talk about revitalizing agriculture and growing the agricultural sector, and at the same time speak about a strong apiculture sector, we are not planting for the honeybee. Our work here on Eden Farms has demonstrated that you can actually design and grow proprietary planting schemes based on the phytochemistry and the pharmacological properties of a particular plant or types of plants. There is the question between a monocrop versus diversity. We have found that a diverse landscape is better because the honeybee would have food throughout the year and there would not be the need to feed the bees. But there's also a very important issue to consider: the health of the bee. The honeybee has more than 170 chemoreceptors in its antennae. And they do not only feed for nectar, look for nectar or pollen for their protein and vitamin sources, they also look for medicines. And there is this relationship between the chemical signaling of the flowering trees and the honeybees, so that honeybees also gather nectar from sources that are that are sorry, I lost my my train of thought here. I'm just saying that the honeybees are also bringing in phytochemicals and different chemicals from the plant when they feed on the medicinal plants. So we have to start talking about farming techniques that would encourage planting schemes for honeybees. We can look at an example, a vivid example of this being done in other countries, New Zealand, for instance. So part of this systems approach would require that we set up nurseries, that we do conservation work and develop seed banks for this range of medicinal plants that would support the apiculture sector. This is an example of a Manuka farm in New Zealand, okay? 20 hectares, about 50 acres, is considered the minimum area as recommended by Manuka Farm. There's an organization, the Manuka industry you would know is well organized, and we can model what we want to do in the Caribbean on their system. So to produce economically viable, high quality Manuka honey, they are actually growing the Manuka plant. They're not just depending on the wild vegetation. And so they are selecting seedlings that would give them that high quality, that high unique Manuka factor, the UMF. And the Manuka plants are planted on flat, rolling, or steep land. So we have all different variations of landscapes in the Caribbean here where we can develop our bee farms. For instance, there's an afforestation program right now in New Zealand. It started in 2017. I'm not sure if it's still on. I think it's still on, where a farmer can get carbon credits and financial support from the Manuka farming organization to set up Manuka plantations. So this is possible. We can do this in the region. Now we know that Manuka plant, the tree, has other benefits, the oil, etc. So there are double benefits from setting up the Manuka plantation. So one of the questions we need to ask is, what is our Caribbean equivalent to Manuka? Can there be a Caribbean equivalent to Manuka? Because we know Manuka has its specific geographic range and environmental boundaries. We are not saying, I am not proposing that we plant Manuka in the Caribbean. What I'm proposing is that we can have our own medicinal plants, which would provide for our honeybees. So we can set up farms of different types of native plants from the Caribbean, which can supply our honeybees. So you have a dual benefit. One, you have the plant and all the value-added products you can get from the plant. And two, you have this special honey, which will you'll be able to market as a premium honey. Here, I'm showing you a diagram of the bactericidal kinetics for honeys that we have produced here in Grenada, using this idea of a systems approach to growing and developing our proprietary planting schemes of medicinal plants, which the honeybees now feed on. And here we looked at four of our varietals. So we had, here I've charted samples 2, 8, 9, and 10, and we use Manuka as our positive control, meaning we compare our results to the results from Manuka. And what we have been able to find out is that when we look at activity against MRSA E. coli, Salmonella, and Pneumoniae, and Pseudomonas, our honeys outperform the Manuka honey every time. We went very much further to analyze the chemical profile of the honey so that we can identify, we were able to control for the different plants. We knew when the honeys were extracted, what plants were feeding on. We've been doing a lot of blockchain technology to map this. And we are actually seeing the signatures of the chemicals from the different medicinal plants in the honey. So this is a table here showing the chemical profile, the different chemicals, and we know which plants these chemicals come from, and we know which time of year, etc., that these honeys were produced. So we were able to do this over a period of 10 years and come up with a profile of medicinal plants in the Caribbean that we can use to find our Caribbean Manuka. Continuing on this idea for a systems approach to apiculture, we need to develop standards for beekeeping and farm management. We have a lot of variations in how beekeeping is done. We've developed our own manual and our own trade secrets for how we manipulate our honey supers, how we manipulate our hives, still using natural beekeeping to produce a consistent quality of honey. Because you can get variation, we know, based on environmental variability, but you also want to control for your method, for your technique, how you do your animal husbandry, how you take care of the hives, etc., and when you extract honey. So over the last 6 years, we've done quite a lot of work to standardize our technique and to come up with a farm management program. Standards are needed for honey production and processing also. We have a lot of variation in how people handle honey. There are persons who tell you that you must heat the honey to kill the yeast. And we know that if you have ripened honey, heating the honey denatures the honey. Now, one of the things about developing a farming system, you would now be able to sell your honey based on provenance of the place. We were able to compare the honeys from different regions of the island and look at the quality of honey as influenced by environmental and geographical features, what you know, what we refer to as the terroir when you speak. The same concept that you apply to wines and other farm processes, we have applied that to our honey production system. And so we've tested the soil and all sorts of environmental variabilities in the different locations where the plants grow, because that affects the phytochemistry of the plant. It affects the water that the honeybees feed on. It affects all sorts of issues with sunlight and airflow and the whole health of the bee colony. If the environmental health is in a certain matrix, we can plot for things like the amount of propolis that's produced, the amount of venom that is used to sanitize the hives, and all of those things contribute to the chemistry and the quality of the honey. So here we have a comparative of the antibacterial activity of honey from different regions, and we can see that the profiles vary based on where that varietal came from and for the different drug-resistant bacteria in question. So blue here refers to MRSA or Streptococcus. The orange is E. coli. The gray is Salmonella, then we have pneumonia and Pseudomonas, and we've been able to compare the antibacterial activity of honey from different regions, and we can see how that varied. And we've been able to map that back to the terroir of the place, and though that honey was collected at the same time of year. We've also done this for other parameters of the honey, such as the antioxidant profile, etc., of the honey. Now, what we have done is to strip honey to its basic elements and to look at what we have developed and trademarked as the phytomed factor of the honey, where we can now look at the chemicals in the different varietals of honey and look at the antibacterial activity of that honey based on its chemical profile. And again, we use Manuka honey as a positive control to compare the activity of the phytochemicals in the Caribbean honey to the phytochemicals in Manuka. So we have identified a range of plants that could be grown in on farms in large scale to create our Caribbean medicinal honey. Further on with this framework, and for this to make sense for our islands, we need to protect our biological diversity. The framework exists, and we need our governments, ministers of agriculture, foreign affairs, Ministry of Health, all the persons working with the Biodiversity Convention, and so to get on board so that we could implement the provisions under the Nagoya Protocol. We need to sign the Madrid Protocol to protect our intellectual property. I heard the minister saying that one of the objectives of the Jeff-funded project is to ensure that the benefits of beekeeping and this expansion that you're talking about is owned by the region. So we must sign the Madrid Protocol. Antigua and Barbuda is the only country in the region who has signed and ratified the Madrid Protocol, which allows for protection of intellectual property rights in over 122 countries. For us to get the protection that we have had for our trademarks and patents that we've developed from our research, we had to file in many countries. So we've had to file in China, the EU, the UK, the USA, elsewhere here in the Caribbean and Grenada, so that we can get protection. Whereas if our country was signatory to the Madrid Protocol, all we had to do was one filing in Grenada and automatically get international protection for our innovation. The governments also need to sign the agreement, the WIPO agreement, which would allow us to have geographical indicators. Just as how you have Blue Mountain coffee, we can protect our Caribbean honey. The different islands could protect whichever medicinal plant they decide to promote, or medicinal plants, because the chemistry would vary from one island to the next. There are many standards that we need to adopt, and there is a need for quite a bit of research and development. We're not doing sufficient of that. For instance, I briefly mentioned the different subspecies of honeybees that we have here in the region based on what was imported from as early as the 17th century. Yet we are still importing bees, which are way along the genetic modification spectrum, and we have some of the original wild type of honeybees here in the region that we should be doing research on and actually trying to protect that as our biological diversity. The professional networks, is good that AGBO is doing this, and we must congratulate Gladstone Solomon for the work that he has done to get this organization going and to keep it going for 20 years. And we hope that a new generation of beekeepers would keep this movement alive. And there has to be some way to develop a benefit sharing mechanism for, for the apiculture sector. I'll just quickly deliberate on future directions for this 21st century approach. Based on what we have been doing here, we have been doing quite a bit of clinical trials with our honey and medicinal products. There is a surgeon that we are working with who has been using our wound healing products, for instance, with great results. We were able to enter a COVID-19 trial, and the results are phenomenal. There's a preprint of that research paper that was just put out by Yale University, and this is undergoing peer review right now. We heard about the COVID trial that was coordinated by Harvard University in the USA, and I wrote to the head of the team, sent our honeys to them, and they were used in testing on COVID positive patients. And we had results which showed that within 72 hours of treatment, the patients showed recovery, and the second PCR tests were all negative. So there is some promising work with honey and herbs being used to improve symptoms from COVID, because we know part of the whole issue with COVID is not only the virus, but the co-infection from drug-resistant bacteria. We know that there are many antiviral plants that our honeybees are feeding on, and some of those chemicals are present in our honey. And so the trials serve to confirm that. And so there's a lot of writing up and analysis of the data that is taking place right now. And we are busy working on a range of Caribbean cures. As I showed you earlier, we have cures all the way back from the 16th and 17th century, where our indigenous knowledge was combined with European knowledge, with knowledge from Africa, to produce cures, and honey features in many of those Caribbean cures. So I'll end my presentation here because we started late, and I will allow you to ask me any questions, and I can elaborate further on any points that someone may want to ask. I'll hand you over to Richard.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Jessamy. That has been a very insightful and informative discussion. I hope a lot of beekeepers around the region and internationally have on the lookout that Caribbean medicinal honey is quickly on its way to a supermarket shelf or a pharmacy near you, because the Caribbean is coming quickly to recapture or to take over that medicinal market. We now pass you on to Dr. Demblewolf. That's our next presenter. I'm sure we should have a few questions. Anybody wants to fire a few questions? Anybody in the audience wants to fire a question? Mr. Romulus, please.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Jessamy. Great to see you after such a long time. Excellent presentation. I wanted to comment on the fact that you have integrated systems theory into the apiculture industry in Grenada. As a geographer and an environmental planner, I can highly appreciate that. And I think you are on the right track. I think systems theory best mimics nature. And what you are in fact doing is adopting natural principles in a systemic way for all the feedback loops. So let me compliment you on that. And I do hope in St. Lucia, as we develop our program, we'll be able to continue the collaboration and partnership, because I think together we could go where no one has gone before with extensive collaboration and partnership. Thank you for this excellent presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Romulus. You are correct. We have not seen each other in quite some time, many years. And I'm very pleased to see that you are still holding up the fort and doing the great work that you are doing with the Small Grants Program in St. Lucia and with Brother Matthias and the beekeepers in St. Lucia. So I've been apprised of some of that through Brother Matthias. So good to see you today. Thanks for your remarks, and thanks for organizing this forum so that I can share a little bit of what we're doing here. And I look forward to those opportunities to collaborate, and so we can find our Caribbean manuka, or well, I should say our Caribbean medicinal plants, which we'll talk more about. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Dr. Jessamy. I think it was an excellent presentation. I see some comments online. Where can your book be found? Medicinal Wild Honeybee Plants of the Caribbean. That's a request coming in there. You care to answer that question if possible?
So yes, the book is completed, but we have not published it as yet for a few reasons, because we are completing our trademark and patent process.
Okay, great, great.
For some of our work. So it's going to be available in February of next year. When we launch our products.
There's another point here from President of AGBO, Mr. Obi Roberts. He says, excellent presentation. There is a need to expand the research to the South American mainland. So more research, I guess, in the northern plains, up in Guyana, French Guyana, Suriname. There's a lot of variations. I believe most of the vegetation probably comes up from the northern tip of South America, goes up through the chain of islands, the original forest. So it'd be interesting to go back to the source and to see what the source has to offer in that regards.
Yes, we actually have quite a bit of data on the different regions in Guyana and the potential plants that are there for the different regions. I think there were 10 regions. Right. And so we have a listing of all the different plants that are indigenous, that are present, that are important for the medicinal properties and also a source of nectar for honeybees. So there's a huge database that we've been able to put together on South America and Central America also.
Great. All right, I don't see any more points. I see a few wows, I see a few amazings. I so agree with the comments that Dr. Jessamy has made. So I think that it's been very insightful, your presentation. I hope there are a lot of ministry personnel throughout the region listening to your presentation, understanding the desperate need to craft and shape a regional position for honey production, more than what has been done of late, because it's one of those industries, just as we used to supply limes and all the cocoa, we export it across the world. Honey is something that if we pool our resources together, we can make critical mass, and we'll be able to export that in real tangible quantities to North America, Europe, and other markets across the world, especially Asia. Asia is a very buoyant market. They're very, very big into honey, and they will pay a higher price for premium honey. So it's a market that we need to get into. I've had the fortune to get some honey into that market, but the volumes that I could produce was not really sustainable to get to that market on a continuous basis. But we did it just for the fun of it, to say we sold honey in Japan. All right. We would like to just wrap up. If there's no more questions, I've got a couple of questions. I got a couple of points here quickly, and then we have to wrap up. Greg Rawlins, ICA representative, St. Lucia, excellent presentation, excellent work. Josie Lewis from Team in India. Team India would like to congratulate Dr. Velma Jessamy for her great presentation. Thank you. Mr. Greg Rawlins again, high-end niche markets are the way to go for the Caribbean beekeepers. So I think we have some clear direction and message of where we need to go. Dr. Jessamy, one more question for you, one more point? Okay.
What's my name?
Mr. How could I forget your name, Your Eminence? Mr.
A
Romulus.
senior moment there for you.
The beard is getting gray, so you must forgive me.
You need to use some more honey, man.
I think so. I need to massage my scalp with it. And,
No, I was just saying, Valma touched en passant on the nexus between apiculture and biodiversity, and I want to amplify that a lot more, because I think this is where it starts, and this is where we need to continue doing some work. The protection of our biodiversity, parks and protected areas. How do we connect the two, and how do we look at the economics of apiculture as well, and protection of our biodiversity? Here is a strong argument, I think, for us to begin to diversify our economy and look at apiculture as another industry to lift us up. And more importantly, since it is in many respects can be indigenous, it can draw on our culture, it can draw on our indigenous knowledge, it can draw on our sense of being. I see apiculture as being perhaps a route to uplifting us as Caribbean people as well. So it's not only the science and the economics and so on, but I see it as being a drive towards that, the Bob Marley emancipate yourself from mental slavery kind of thing. I really believe we can achieve it if we can push ourselves up the value chain and control every aspect of this chain. Let's not let it not go to other persons. Let it be within the Caribbean. We can have partnerships and collaboration, but let us see how we can effectively manage it and control it. Thank you, Richard.
Okay. Well, once again, Dr. Jessamy, I would like to thank you for your presentation. We need to move on now, so we're going to end this segment, and we're going to slide across to Dr. Demble Wolf's presentation from Trinidad and Tobago. So once again, thank you, and well, bye-bye. Thank you. Leo.
Hello?
Yeah, well, we're online now. I need to call you back. Huh? Hello, good morning, Dr. Demble Wolf. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Fantastic, fantastic. Sorry to keep you waiting. We had a couple of technical delays in this morning, which has kind of knocked everybody back. So hopefully you should be able to recapture and get back on schedule by after lunch. Can you turn on your video, please?
Sure. Let me.
And then you could share screen and you could proceed as request as at
It
your leisure.
says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
I thought you guys had okay. We may have to log you back out to rectify
Yeah.
it. But hold on a second, technical team's working at it. So how is beautiful Trinidad and Tobago today?
I'm not outside. Cloudy.
Cloudy, okay. And how are our wonderful pollinators?
They're doing all right. I was most upset these idiotic gardeners cut down my tree outside yesterday without asking.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Maybe we could, while we're waiting for this, oops. Okay, so Dr. Demberwolf, the team needs to log you out for everybody out for like 15, 20 seconds, and then
Sure.
and everybody can log back in, please. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think they're logging everybody out now. Guys, let's try and resolve that for the next presentation, please. I know it's partly my fault, so the burden shall rest on my shoulders, but we've discovered the fault now, so it no longer rests on my shoulders. I've squarely transferred it to the other end of the room now. So do the next one time, guys. Oh my God! Well, you see, the blame squarely lies elsewhere, other than me, you know. So we good, guys? Can I log in? We're back. Is Doc there with us? Okay, great. How is everybody in our small conference facility enjoying the program so far? Any comments? Anybody like to make any comments? Anybody from the wider public? Mr. Romulus, what are your thoughts so far, sir? Good? Okay, great. Mr. Prosper? Nothing is it? Oh my dear, okay. Ms. O'Geese, anything from your end? How you find it? Great. Okay, thumbs up. That's good, that's good. Mr. Frederick? All right. Guys, why don't we run? Okay, next time we have a break, can we run one of our little Thank you for rejoining us at our second session of the Caribbean Beekeepers Congress. Our next presenter is Dr. Lena Demberwolf from the beautiful Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago. And she's going to give us a wonderful presentation on climate change and neotropical pollinators. So without further ado, Dr. Demberwolf, please.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. Should I go ahead and share my presentation, or are you guys doing that on your end?
No, you can do it. Go ahead. You
Okay.
go ahead. We're just backup if anything goes wrong.
I'm not sure I have the option to share my screen. Oh, no, I do. Hang on a sec.
You should. There you go. Wonderful.
All right, you guys seeing this?
Yes, we are, ma'am. We are.
Okay, great. All right. So again, good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change and neotropical pollinators, more so about the pollination issue than about climate change. And generally the state of the knowledge and policies and programs in Caribbean small island developing states. So first of all, I just want to kind of cover what is pollination. It seems like a relatively simple question, but it's not actually that simple. So even though pollination is really the movement of pollen from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower, there's a lot more involved in that. Insects or any kind of animals that carry pollen across need to be specifically adapted to doing so. They have to have specific physiological features that can carry the pollen. They have to have the pollen deposited on the correct part of the insect or bird or bat or whatever to be effectively transported across. The pollen still has to be viable, so it has to be within a very small space of time. It's usually only a few hours a day. The pollen can't be altered in any way. Many times when bees chew the pollen and stick it to their legs, it's no longer viable for the plant for reproduction purposes. And so on. So there are a lot of things that go into pollination itself, and it's not usually as simple as just pollen being transferred one way or the other. So the process itself is actually quite complicated. So when we talk about pollination and the transfer of these pollen grains from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower, either on the same flower or on a different flower on the same plant, or on a different flower on a different plant of the same species, there are a lot of things that are happening right now. So generally, people have estimated the value of global pollination at 153 billion euros a year. This is just one estimate. So there are many different ways of estimating the value of pollination. This was just one of these studies, but the idea is just to illustrate that it's an awful lot of money, and that without the pollination service, we would be in a lot of trouble. More than 90% of the 250,000 species of modern flowering plants and 65% of all plant species are pollinated by animals. So there is some wind pollination. There are especially crops that are wind pollinated, like corn and so on. But these are in the minority. The majority of these plants are pollinated by some kind of animal. And currently there's a lot of talk about the global pollination crisis. So we're talking about pollinators disappearing all over the world, and initially the question was as to why, and we've kind of figured out that there are a lot of different components to that and a lot of different reasons why pollinators keep on disappearing. Pollination is generally not accounted for, so this means that in the GDP calculations and in any kind of large-scale government accounting system, pollination is not considered, as are many other ecosystem services. So things and goods and services that are produced by nature are often not considered when they look at the value that is produced by a country. And they're also vastly undervalued regionally. So we don't really tend to consider pollination as an agricultural input. And as a consequence, people are not taking care of it and not managing it properly. Generally, a large proportion of the crop value that is due to pollination, but again, it's unrecognized. And there is generally a shift to growing animal pollinated crops. So before, people used to grow more crops that depend on wind pollination. Now we're shifting to increasingly growing things that require animal pollination. And this results in this pollinator shortage, because now we need more of them and they're already disappearing. So this is affecting our food production. Generally, this is resulting in it can result in a food shortage, but most importantly, it can result in a nutrition shortage. So in particular, crops that contain vitamin A tend to require a lot of animal pollination, and these are just not available. So that means that as a consequence, especially in countries where there is generally a food shortage situation, or agriculture is generally under a little bit more pressure, there's a nutrition shortage, or can be a nutrition shortage in that regard. So a lot of African countries, for example, could be affected by this. There's a general lack of information on pollination. Pollination is, as we're going to talk about, is not a very simple, straightforward situation. A lot goes into it. And as a result, we're lacking a little bit of the data to inform our policies and to inform our management strategies. And as a result, the reduction in pollinators results in a global reduced biodiversity because, as you know, pollination is either considered a supporting service or and what it usually does is supports the other ecosystem services. So the biodiversity of plants and subsequently biodiversity of other animal species is affected by this because the animals are living in the plants and are living on the plants and are feeding on the plants. So it affects entire food chains and food webs if pollinators tend to disappear. On the background, that's an okra pollen grain, by the way. So generally, it's important to note that not only honeybees contribute to pollination, wild pollinators are more important, especially in this part of the world, because the honeybees that are over here have not co-evolved with our local plant species. So in Europe, European honeybees are useful for pollination. In the Caribbean, not so much because they are sort of overtaking the wild pollinators. The wild pollinators are being bullied away from their food sources, and they can actually also damage the flowers by overvisitation. And it can have a negative impact on the species diversity of wild pollinators as well as the local and endemic plant species that we have across the Caribbean. Honeybees are not the most effective pollinators as a consequence. We talked a little bit earlier about the physiological structure of these organisms and where their hairs are situated and so on. So in some cases, there's a very close relationship between pollinator and plant. Sometimes a pollinator can visit many different species of plants. Sometimes a pollinator is very much only visiting one particular species of plant, and they have a very specific relationship and they adapt to each other. So the anthers of the flower are located in a very particular position that can only be effectively transported pollen by that particular pollinator. And as a result, whatever the specific pollinator is the most effective for that particular plant. And that is not the case with honeybees in this part of the world because none of these plants have co-evolved with honeybees. So other pollinators tend to be more effective on this side. Not all pollinators are bees. So in many cases, people think of bees as, think sort of this analogous situation between bees and pollinators, but pollinators are not just bees. There are many other species. Flies are very important, wasps are very important, bats and birds are mostly pollinating trees. Hummingbirds are very, very useful for trees, for different types of tree species. And there are also things like bugs and beetles and so on that can also do some of the pollination. In other cases, can actually be larger organisms, so down to monkeys and sometimes lizards, by the way, such as this one, can actually be doing some pollination in different parts of the world and for different plants. So not just bees are responsible for pollination. So when we had done some research, we had done some work, this is sort of the kind of baseline that we came up with for Trinidad, or at least in some agricultural crops. So as you can tell, this is actually quite a complicated relationship, and I kind of just pulled up this slide to illustrate that you need to have many species carrying out the same job. So the pollination service is really the combination of different species. And the idea in pollination, as in biodiversity on a whole, is usually the more the better. You need more species because if you have this diversity, if one of these species tends to disappear, you have others to do the job because you don't know. And especially in a situation where we don't know what's happening, we do know what's happening. But in terms of climate change, where we have this increased uncertainty about the environment and these changes in habitat that are occurring, there is a good chance that we're going to lose some of these species in specific areas or on islands entirely. And as a consequence, the idea is to manage these pollination services for diversity. The more species you have that can do the job, the better. So for instance, you can see on top there that Apis mellifera they haven't been very picky and choosy on what it is that they're feeding on. which is a good thing because it means that they can pollinate a wide variety of crops. Again, in this case, recall that most of these crops are actually also imported now, or also have European origins, which means that those species, again, their adaptation for this is actually quite good. So yes, so the idea is that we want to have more species to have a better pollination service. And again, the more food sources they have, the more diverse the food sources that are available, the better for them as well. Because if a food source disappears, it means that they still have another one to go on. So the question is really what makes a good pollinator. Again, a good pollinator has a bunch of features that allows it to carry pollen effectively from one flower of one species to another flower of the same species. So not all pollinators pollinate all plant species, and not all flower visitors are pollinators, and that's very important to note. So just because you see an insect or any other kind of animal on a flower, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're pollinating that plant, because they can be there for the food alone. So in some cases, some bees are nectar robbers. So they would bore a hole on the bottom of the flower and access the nectaries and steal the nectar and go away with it. Others may be less subtle, they may be more subtle. They may be visiting the flower for the pollen, and you see them busily packing on the pollen and then flying off somewhere, but they never land on another flower. They just collect the pollen and they go home. That doesn't help the plant at all. Or they go and they collect the pollen from one flower, but then move on to a different flower, but of a different plant species, in which case you also don't have this effective pollination going on. So very much so that there are a lot of these insects that visit flowers, but they're not actually pollinating anything. So pollination itself is actually not as easy to prove, because you have to prove that not only that the insect goes from one flower to the other, but that it has the correct hairs and the correct positions to be able to pick up the pollen and drop it off at the other flower. And it has to be the same species of plant that it goes to. It has to not actually steal the nectar or the pollen. It has to actually go to the appropriate parts. It has to visit the female flowers or the female flower parts of that flower. And it has to also be able to carry this effectively and not manipulate it. So here you're seeing a bee that has pollen baskets. This is actually one of the stingless bee species. And the pollen that is on its legs has actually been manipulated and chewed, as you know, that's what bees do. And that is no longer viable, no longer useful. So the pollen that it's packing on is not really going to pollinate anything there. So it's really the pollen on the other parts of the bee that would be useful for pollination for the flowers. So again, what makes a good pollinator? The physiological characteristics. The hairs, in specific areas where it can carry it from one place to the other. It has to actually have things that it can stick the pollen to move it across. And again, the thing is also that to recall that pollen is only viable for a short space of time. So it may only be viable for about an hour or two early in the morning. And if it's not picked up during that time, it's not useful to the plants. The body size of the insect is important because insects can travel different distances according to their body size very often. So the larger ones, like the Xylocopa, they can carry on over quite a distance. But smaller bees, like the small stingless bee species that we have in Trinidad, or lots of the solitary bees that are ground nesting, all of those have limitations in terms of their flight range. So many times these actually don't stray further than 100 meters from where they live. And this has implications for how far they can pollinate plants and how much they can assist in increasing the genetic diversity of those plant species. The location and the presence of body hairs is important. And so on, have to have hairs in specific locations to be able to carry this across. Please let me know. I'm just seeing a notice here that my internet connection is unstable. If I'm cutting off at any point in time, please let me know. The presence and location of body hairs is important, and whether or not they are scorpio pollen baskets, that is important for the insects, but not so much for the flowers, because that is something that those pollen grains are not really useful for them. The flight distance is affected by the body size, and then you have behavioral characteristics. So the abiotic conditions. Is it raining? Is it windy? Is it very hot outside? That affects whether or not a pollinator gets outside and goes and does some pollination. So basically, the issue is this in particular, that if it is that it's raining outside, people don't like to go outside either. People don't like to go and get something to eat or drink when it's raining and when it's gross outside. Same thing for the pollinators. They will go when the weather is good for them. So that affects it. The landscape or the habitat is an issue. So if that is a challenging terrain, or depending on the availability of food sources, that affects whether or not they go out. Again, the flight range affects the pollination. The food preferences, what do they like to eat? What is the proximity of those food sources? If they have something nearby that is acceptable, they may prefer feeding on that versus something that they really, really love that is a lot further away. So those are also relationships that need to be accounted for. Whether or not they're solitary or social. Social insects tell each other where the food sources are. So there's a chance that those plants get more of a pollination benefit than those pollinated by solitary insects because it's only one insect. And flower constancy. So does the insect visit the same species of plant over and over and over, or does the insect go from one species to the next species to the next species to the next species? So those are all things that have an effect on that. So now we need to look at what threats do pollinators actually face. And there's a whole series of them. So again, we're talking about the pollination crisis that's happening globally, where there's a global decline of wild pollinators and increased challenges with managed pollinators. I don't have to tell you guys about that. You all know all about that. And there are more pollinator-dependent crops being grown, and there's an increasing human population, which increases the stresses on pollinators because we demand more food, which means that people are growing more food, which requires the pollination, but at the same time, it's cutting down the habitat for the pollinators that have to do the pollination. So we are increasingly stressing the pollinators that we increasingly need for our own benefit. High pollinator biodiversity equals high general biodiversity. So one more time, this is just worthwhile reinforcing. The more species of pollinators that we have, the more species of everything else that we have, because they maintain plant diversity, and plant diversity maintains animal diversity. It maintains food webs and food chains. It maintains habitat and all sorts of things. So, so that is an issue there. So generally, threats to pollination include pesticides and herbicides, which is a real issue. There are no real standards set for pollinators, for pesticides and herbicides. Likely, there are similar responses to target organisms, and there are no regulations in terms of the pesticides and herbicides. Or very few in terms of pollinators specifically. So a large number of species exist, and different species respond differently to different pesticides. Everybody has a different response, and we also are lacking a lot of data on this particular issue. So there is data available on how species respond to pesticides for countries in northern latitudes. However, our species composition is completely different, and we don't know how they respond to the pesticides that are being used in the fields here. It is difficult to protect the species when they're not recorded. So if we generally do not know what we have, that's the baseline. Because insects in particular are understudied in the Caribbean on a whole, and we don't know what we have. Therefore, it's impossible to protect them. Habitat destruction, quarrying, logging, housing developments is a huge issue. Lack of legal protection policies and management plans tend to be a thing throughout the Caribbean. And that there's a lack of knowledge, data, and awareness for the farmer and general public. They are not particularly, they often tend to not consider pollination or pollinators as a group of organisms that require some sort of attention. And also honeybees, the Apis mellifera, may negatively affect native pollinators and plant species. And then the big one is climate change. So we have the issue with high pesticide use in particular is that people know very little about the pollinators, and as a consequence, they place little value on them. And then as a consequence of that, there are a few viable support systems. And there's often a high consumer demand for the perfect vegetable. People don't like to eat the funny looking fruit. They want something nice and plump and round and without the worms and so on. And as a consequence, that is what people grow because that's what they can sell. And so there's this end of the consumer that is an issue here. There's very little knowledge about pest species on a whole, which means that people just tend to spray broad spectrum pesticides, which kills everything. And there's little knowledge about the effects of pesticides on the insect on a whole, but also as a consequence, also as a health effect. So many people don't know how the pesticides affect humans. And this is sort of creating the perfect storm for pesticide use and for pollinators. So when we talk about climate change, we know, and there's tons and tons and tons of evidence that our climate is changing. And we know about sea level rise, which is a huge issue for Caribbean, small island developing states. We know about temperature rise and change in weather patterns. So the weather patterns, I know for beekeepers are a problem in terms of honey production, but it's also a problem for pollinators on a whole. So in general, in the Caribbean, there's a complete lack of data for how pollinators are affected by climate change. There are higher temperatures, and this reduces the food sources and it reduces the nesting habitat. So we don't know how this, so pollinators respond like any other species. Everything has its optimum range within it operates, and once things go out of that range, it becomes uncomfortable for them. And we are going to lose species. The thing is, we do not know what we have, so we don't even know what we're losing, and that is the biggest issue, which is why I will always advocate for pollinator surveys and identifying species. We are losing species rapidly as a consequence of these environmental changes. So there will be reduced food sources because not only are the insects themselves sensitive to changes in temperature, changes in weather patterns, if there's an increased rainfall, they're going to be less likely out foraging. If there are issues with flooding, it means that habitat is lost. About 70% of pollinators are ground nesting, or at least of the bees. And many of them rely on this. And if flooding is an issue and sea level rise is an issue, it means a considerable amount of the habitat and nesting habitat is lost. This is not necessarily helped by agricultural practices like tilling and so on, that disturbs and damages these ground nesting habitats for all of these ground nesting insects. And sort of the combination of direct human impacts and the sort of indirect climate change impacts sort of creates a huge problem for these pollinators. So the change in weather patterns is an issue as well. Obviously, the timing of pollinator activity, the nectar availability or pollen viability could be affected. It is not entirely clear how a change or how an increase in temperature will affect the viability of the pollen. So it could be that they are viable for a shorter period of time, which means it's a shorter window for pollination to occur. It could also be that that pollen and nectar are less available overall. And what happens in countries that have seasons or more defined seasons is that pollinators are only active during the warmer periods and they are inactive during the cold periods. And what has been happening or what has been documented there is that they tend to miss each other. So the flowering of the plants takes place before the pollinators become active, or the pollinators become active before the flowering of the plants. And that results in them missing each other, no pollination occurring. In many cases, it results in pollinators actually starving. We do not have that particular issue here, or at least not yet, or at least we don't know what form or shape it will take. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the climate change effects of pollination. And I think that's actually the main point. We don't know enough, and that is the issue that we need to address. So policy in the Caribbean, there's no pollinator or pollination policy in the English-speaking Caribbean that I'm aware of. If you know about it, please correct me. I'll be happy to look into it. Pollination is mentioned in some national documents. So, for example, the State of St. Lucia's Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture Report, or the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan of the earlier one, Barbados in 2002. Those mention vaguely pollinators and pollination, but they don't speak to any kind of management of these organisms. So we need to start incorporating these issues into national planning. There is a lack of data on pollination in the Caribbean on a whole. We don't know what species we have. We're not looking into it. And without that, it is a very dangerous situation because we do not know what we're losing and we don't know how to stop it. And pollination is generally not included in climate change policies, or at least none that I have seen. And that's also an important issue because if we're not considering how climate change affects pollinators or pollination, then we also don't know how to adapt for it in terms of a management environment. So if you're talking about gaps and needs, pollinator surveys are needed. We need to research the effects on climate change and local species in a neotropical context. We need to know how climate change affects what we have. And for that, we need to know what we have to begin with. We need to establish pollination networks to see who pollinates what, so that we can identify what happens if something is lost. And we need to identify the vulnerable species. Which ones require protection? What kind of habitats do they live in? How can we put safeguards in place to make sure that they're not lost? We need to look at the crucial species for particular plants. So for instance, if we have endemic plant species, what pollinates those? It's important to know. Biophysical accounts basically just refers to being able to count the number of species and individuals in particular places, so that we basically can resurvey on a regular basis and see if there are changes. Are there more species? Are there less species? Are there more individuals? Are there less individuals? How does that work? Natural capital accounting refers to these values being incorporated in some sort of financial sense in gross domestic product calculations and so on, so that we actually in monetary terms account for the value of these organisms, because in many cases it is difficult to explain the value to people unless you assign a dollar value to it. Policy development is extremely important. We need to know what the policies are. We need to see where the gaps are, and not only.
Oops. Oh dear, seem to have lost her. Dr. Demblewolf, we seem to have lost you there briefly. Are you still hearing me, or? Yes, no? Let's give her a couple of seconds. Maybe her internet has a problem.
I'm sorry, I just cut off there, I think.
Yes, you're back. You're back. We can hear you.
Sucks, I'm sorry.
But we're running out of time. Time is, I know we stole a lot of your time, but we're running out of time.
Sure, I will wrap up in 1 second, I promise. I'm so sorry.
It's all right, but I have a few questions for you, go ahead, continue.
You want me to just wrap up quick, or you want to?
No, it's you, it's your presentation. I mean, how much more
Okay,
you
sure.
have to go?
Sure, no, it's literally 1 or 2 slides, it's nothing much.
Cool.
Right. So, so we are starting the pollinator project in January in Trinidad and Tobago, and we're looking at the effects of pesticides, increasing knowledge base, strengthening agriculture systems, education awareness, stingless bee conservation in particular, creating tools for future work, creating partnerships and policy review. So this is something that will start. Generally, people ask what they can do. Private citizens can plant flowers, start kitchen gardens, and provide pollinator habitat. Farmers can observe and report insects. They can employ things such as multi-cropping, planting non-crop flowers between crops, spray, if they have to spray pesticides, do it in conditions where there's low wind, high temperature, and low dew conditions, plant hedgerows to prevent the movement of pesticides, provide pollinator habitat, use alternative pest control methods, and leave portions of the land unplanted for pollinators. For researchers, we're looking at pollination services, investigating the effects of landscapes and so on, and decreasing the gap between science and policy. We do have this project, which is, this has been going on for a few years now, and I have created a citizen science project for every Caribbean island. So you can go and look for pollinators and pests of and add your island. And this is a project on iNaturalist, or several projects on iNaturalist. And you can go on these pages, and you can add your insect observations to there, and that way you are helping record pollinators. And also the data is available for anybody
Oops, we've lost her again. And this is quite an interesting project. Whoops. Oh, we lost everything. We lost everything. Oh dear. All right, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. We seem to have temporarily lost Dr. Demwolf. She did say that her internet was a little patchy. There was some great, let me see if there were some great questions there. Peter Mitchell took a screenshot of the last page. Shada Mahabid asked, I love the slide on what we can do. Can you please share? I want to share. Okay, Hayden Cinnamon, the Chief Apiarist, Trinidad and Tobago, very informative presentation, so keep the comments coming, guys. I hope it will encourage Dr. Demblewolf to reconnect. If not, we will have to move along. I had one question for her. No, any questions? How is everybody here finding it? Any questions from anybody here? Nope. Okay. Yes, sir.
I think the recurring theme there is the research element I heard. We really need to set up a research system.
Yes.
That is sustained over time because, and that's in keeping with what we did in the People's Parliament.
Yes.
Only 2 days ago. The world is in such a way now that without research, we are lost.
Definitely.
Almost, because we can't make the kind of sound decisions for the progress of our economies. And I'm thinking that if we're going to talk seriously about apiculture as an industry, research and innovation is pivotal, the core. It must lead us into the 21st century and beyond. So that's it. Thank you.
I think Dr. Demblewolf is back with us. Dr. Demblewolf.
Hi, yes, I'm so sorry. Digicel is not cooperating today, so I logged back on from my phone. So I'm hoping you guys can hear me
I
now.
will use this as an opportunity to plug our sponsors, Flow. Flow is our data provider for the knowledge fair this week. So maybe go back. Flow does it well, man. Flow keeps the data flowing.
Well, I can't argue that today. So.
All right, so you wish to continue or you want to take some questions quickly?
I'm not sure up to where I got or where I cut off. I know I just had, there was nothing else much in the end other than the iNaturalist project, so I just wanted to highlight that we had created these projects for everybody, for every island in the Caribbean.
Yes.
And that people can record their observations there. The data is free for anyone to download, so if anybody wants to download the observations from everybody in their country or elsewhere or another island, they can. It's literally pollinators and pests of whatever country. And those projects exist there, so you can join it and help us all record species.
Okay, there's a couple of requests. Shada Mahabir asked, I love the slide on what we can do. Can you please share? I want to share.
Sure.
You got some favorable comments from Peter Mitchell in St. Lucia. Took a screenshot of the last page. Very informative presentation. Mr. Hayden Sinanan, that's the Chief Apiculturist in Trinidad and Tobago. Sarah Lightbourne asked, where can we get the presentation? She's all the way in the Bahamas.
You guys can feel free to, you all have my presentation, so you can feel free to share
Sure.
that, that's no problem.
What I can do is I can tell everybody what we'll do. We'll probably post all the presentations on the AGBA website, and you can download them from there. Or so that as long as I get permission from all of the presenters, I can just put it there, and we can just have a place where you could download all the presentations. I have one question for you. I noticed in your slide when you were identifying different pollinators and the different plants that they visited, I noticed that you had coconuts, and apis didn't really pollinate coconuts.
So this is basically just from the research that we had done. So this is not a, be all and end all list. So there's I know they do visit coconut flowers. We have not spent a huge amount of time on coconuts.
Right.
So the ones that we have there is basically what we did is we caught the insects, we washed the pollen grains off of them to see what they're carrying around, and we just haven't found any coconut pollen grains on them. That's all.
That's interesting.
It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not pollinating them. They could very well be doing that. There's just not enough evidence for that. So again, that's something that people can.
There's a lot of research. In the Philippines, one of the largest coconut water producers in the world. I can share some research papers from the Philippines on pollination of coconut trees with you.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, it's just that we haven't found any apis bees that carry the pollen around, but it literally is probably just a feature of there not being many coconut trees in the area where we collected the apis bees.
That's a possibility.
So it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
That's a possibility. That's a possibility. So your research is going to be ongoing, and you're going to get more data from more beekeepers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, I imagine so, yes. And with the BestNet project, we're also going to be getting a lot more data, hopefully, on these different things, and yeah, hopefully we're accumulating a database.
What would be very interesting is with the regional project that Mr. Romulus launched a couple of days ago, is that maybe as you've got such a large repository of data already on Trinidad and Tobago, if you would not mind we filtered in more information to you from the other Caribbean islands, so that you have a wider repository of more information. Because it doesn't make sense us recreating another database to capture that information for the OECS and the Northern Islands when somebody's already started it and you've already got this regional project photographing pollinators. I think it's something that we can coordinate out of this Congress to maybe we could filter, we could maybe do a little presentation on how to capture the data that you require and how.
I would love that. The more the merrier, and coordinating between the Caribbean islands would be great. Because to me, personally, my ultimate goal is to be able to create this kind of information for the Caribbean, period. So in terms of the BestNet project, to me, Trinidad is just sort of the starting point.
Correct.
And the sort of the pilot. But I really want to be able to create this information regionally. Especially because we have very similar plant species and so on, so a lot of the information is sort of transferable between islands. But yes, definitely the recording of pollinators and seeing what people have and so on. If people are interested in regionally collaborating on that, let me know.
I see Mr. Romulus of JFSGP is nodding his head in firm agreement, so I will definitely sit with Mr. Romulus and see how we can, if there's any resources he can put towards a venture of that nature.
Great.
All right, to help along. But thank you. Yes, attendees. What do you want me to do? Okay, we unmuted somebody. Okay. Colma Sierra wants to make a direct contribution. You unmuted them, gentlemen. Okay, they're gonna unmute. Go for it.
Yeah. Hello to everybody. Very nice to share these informations and experiences with you. I'm still concerned on the lack of coordination between the research that is being done in the region, and there have been some attempts like through BestNet or whatever, and I appreciate to see Dr. Dempelwolf again. And yeah, but I'm still thinking, as we have a lack of funding, that we should perhaps coordinate a little bit the research that has to be done. There's many particular items that are very specific for a certain island, but there's also a lot of general information that could be shared, and I think that we should move forward to get this network working a little bit better together, because we have a lot of things in common, although there's many particular things that to study in each island. But to move forward, I think there's some ways, and I don't know who should be addressed to get a better coordination of these works being done. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I really would love regional cooperation on this. Again, the BestNet project is a start, and it's basically, well, for me personally, it's a pilot in Trinidad to see, or to be able to base this thing on. But regionally, we definitely need to work together and put resources together to do this. So one of the things for the BestNet project is going to be for us to develop sort of pilot methodologies that can easily be replicated in other places and across the islands, so that we all use a standard methodology to assess pollinators so that we can compare this. Because one of the issues now is that whenever people do pollinator surveys and pollinator research, everybody uses a different methodology. Everybody does something different, and it's very difficult to compare anything across sites. So we would like to be able to establish methodologies by which that can be used easily and with, most importantly, with little resources, so that people can count pollinators in their respective countries and islands, and that we can then compare this and create a database on a regional basis. So yeah, anybody that's interested in doing anything together, feel free to share my contact information, let me know, and I'm very excited about that sort of stuff.
Okay, we got one more question there from Mr. Gladstone Solomon in Trinidad and Tobago, our former past president. I don't know if he's there, if he's going to answer, or should I ask it on his behalf? Okay, his question was, is it a possibility of development of a Trinidad and Tobago pollen database? Is that the overall objective? We're going to get to that point?
Well, in that case, I believe Saraswati is going to talk to you guys, or has already done that.
No, she will do that tomorrow. Yes, Saraswati, yes.
Right,
yes.
so she would probably be the person to ask on the pollen aspect. I know she's working on something like that. Personally, in terms of the pollination component, the pollen database is not as important as it is for beekeepers. So I don't have that much information on it, but Saraswati, I'm sure, will be able to give you more information on that.
I've had the privilege of reading their presentation already, and it's an eye-opener. It's a lot of great information inside there. I have one more last question. An anonymous attendee, seeing that all pollinators are affected by pesticides of different origins, how can crop farmers be helpful in this regard to alleviate the problem?
Well, so basically, the less pesticide is used, the better. I mean, I know sometimes it's unavoidable, but generally using alternate methods of pest control is much better and much more effective. So if you're even things like just intercropping and planting things like that are very smelly, like mint and so on, to repel certain types of pests.
Okay.
You can grow certain types of fungi that are particularly useful in protecting some crops and so on. So there's a whole range of alternate pest control methods. If you must spray pesticides, again, the recommendation is to do it at a time when there's a relatively low wind, so it doesn't carry very far, that the temperature is high so that they don't stay on the plants for very long and they degrade relatively quickly, and most of the time do it in the evenings rather than the mornings, because the mornings is when the pollinators tend to visit the flowers. Also, there are different categories and types of pesticides, so you want to use the ones that, from the WHO perspective, have the lower impact rating. And those are just some of the things. But, I mean, yes, so generally the rule is the less the better.
Okay, that's great. I don't see any more questions in... Mr. Romulus has a question for you.
Well, not actually a question, but a contribution. We were talking about the organic way and biopesticides and biofertilizers and so on. Just recently, the Bellevue Farmers Cooperative of St. Lucia published a manual on how to produce your own biopesticides and biofertilizers from your backyard using organic products in your backyard. And it has an ISBN number now, and it should be going. In fact, the sale, it is 40 EC dollars per one. I just heard that last evening. And we're trying to see if we can get it on Amazon.com. It's the first of its publication in St. Lucia, and I'm not sure if the other parts of the Caribbean have produced such a well-illustrated and a manual for anybody from the housewife and the house husband down to the scientist in his or her backyard can buy this and really put it to good use. So we will.
I would, if you send me a way of getting it, I don't know, I'd love a copy. I don't know how to get my hands on it, but send me a link or something so I can figure out how to buy it.
I will buy you a copy, Dr. Demwolf, and I'll personally post it to you in Trinidad and Tobago. So I will even try to see if I can wrangle it for $20 from Mr. Romulus. Get it at family price, all right? Family and presenter price.
Okay, Sherlock.
All right, but anyway, I don't see any more questions in the chat room. Dr. Sierra, thank you for sending us your email address. I will definitely pass that on to Dr. Demwolf. Dr. Sierra is from the Dominican Republic, so it'll be great to see a collaboration from the Northern Islands with us in the Southern Islands. I think that's what we need to do moving forward in 2021. A lot more of these collaborations that don't really recognize borders as a hindrance. Anyway, Dr. Demwolf, we need to push ahead.
Sure, carry on. Thank you very much for having me.
We're signing back, so I just want to thank everybody for logging into this session. We're going to log out now, and we're going to switch across to our next presentation, which is unfortunately myself and the great Dr. Presper. And we're going to be talking about integrating technology into your beehives. So coming up next, so we're going to sign out now. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating, and please log into our next seminar. Thank you much. Bye-bye. Okay, we have some refreshments outside, guys. And if you want to take one quickly for 2 minutes, and then we can start with our next session, or we want to just roll straight into the next session. Yes, no, indifferent, nobody? You'll take something quickly. All right, cool. He's supposed to finish in 30 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Everybody on the internet. Sorry about the live mic a while ago. I hope I didn't tell any bad jokes that were awful. That's like my singing. But never mind. We're now pushing ahead. We're going to try and catch up sometime. Myself and Dr. Kurt Prosper are now going to do a quick presentation for you on technology-supported apiculture. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to be real quick, best I can. So are we ready, gentlemen? Okay, so some of the major issues in beekeeping that we've discovered in recent times is, and it may have been a recurring decimal you will hear throughout the week of presentations this week, is poor hive management, pests and disease, loss of foraging areas, climate change, and probably most importantly, the productivity of the queen. So information technology, or IoT, Internet of Things, the most common forms we are finding in the modern integrated into beekeeping right now are hive monitors and hive management apps. So information technology can basically help collect data on the bees during their life cycle without exposing them to a lot of stress in the process. So we can collect data remotely, and it wouldn't have any big strain on the bees. And using your hive management app, whilst you're doing your standard beekeeping inspections, you can collect data at the same time. There are very few examples of IT being integrated in apiculture in the English-speaking Caribbean. And I think the project that we've been running for the last 18 months is probably one of the first in English Caribbean speaking. I think Barbados did play around with it a little bit. I know Puerto Rico has done some stuff, but I haven't seen anything beyond that. I haven't seen any data or any studies prepared out of it. So the main objective of this presentation is really to summarize some of the data that we collected successfully and talk about hive and apiary management systems that we are rolling out in St. Lucia. So the two systems that we've been looking at are the Arnia hive monitoring system and the Hive Keep app made by Lepotech out of India. Okay, oops, this slide is in the wrong place. Oh dear. All right. Okay, we're moving right along. So we have purchased a number of hive monitors from a company called Arnia in the UK. We positioned 40 of them around the island along with 4 gateways. 14 were positioned in the west, 5 in the east, 7 in the west, and 18 in the south of the island. The hive monitors were able to capture hive temperature, hive humidity, brood temperature, flight activity, and this would be from monitoring the flight activity, you can use this information to send various types of alerts. If the hive is being robbed by other bees, it will also let you know how well the bees are progressing during the course of the day, and give you an idea of the number of bees in the hive. It has a bee counter feature as well. And on screen now is just a brief example of what the statistics, the data collected, how it's graphed out in the system. So it allows you to plot critical information. Where you see the little boxes that say information or info, that's probably areas where we did critical things that we made a deliberate log, and then it will plot your temperature, your weight of the hive, the humidity, ambient temperature, as well as the brood temperature. So moving on. So one of the things that we found whilst doing our little experiment was there is a difference in the hive temperature and humidity during the seasons. So in the wet season, The humidity in the hive is obviously higher, and in the dry season, the humidity is lower. We found that the optimum value for humidity value in the hive is 45% during the course of the year. This is the optimum value we've noticed. Brood temperature ranges between 32.8 to 36.3 with an optimum value of 34.5 degrees Celsius. These values pretty much mirror data that is being collected in international countries. So there is nothing, so what we can see is that the hive temperatures managed in St. Lucia are very similar to that of the hive temperature ranges of those around the world. So if you're in Siberia, you will still find the hives being maintained at this common temperature. So this is interesting. Humidity ranges between 40 to 65%. Optimum value in the range of 45% humidity. Studies have been done through other persons, and their range is between 40% to 80%. So we're still within the range that is recognized internationally. What are the advantages of the hive monitoring system? It provides a continuous hive and environmental data, sends alerts when there are variations in set values. Data can be used to assess the impact of climate change on the bees' activities, and enables the beekeeper to observe daily weight gains during periods of honey production. One of the disadvantages has been cost of batteries are prohibitive, monitors are labor intensive, and minimal hive manipulation of hives equipped with monitors. So if you've got a hive system that is equipped with a hive monitor and you're looking at it from a scientific perspective, just as we said yesterday, if you're doing queen rearing, you've got to allocate specific hives just to do that task. When you're monitoring hives for scientific purposes, you really don't want to be doing splits or divisions or any major changes to the system during the course of the day. You really want to keep it set and just add stuff as required, and any changes you do make sure you document it and log it so that your experiment can continue as normal. I think before we play this slide, Kurt, I think they got the wrong version, so we'll have to cut across now and then cut back.
All right, no problem.
Sure, you want, yeah. So, run the other presentation. Cue the other presentation, please. And we'll cut back to this one because we updated it, but you're playing the wrong one.
Which one is the click?
The left and right.
Forward and backward.
No, that's the wrong one.
From Good Prosper. All right, that's it. We set. Good day, everyone. I am Kurt Prosper. In my former life, I was the national focal point on a project that assisted on getting data loggers to run the experiment Richard mentioned earlier. So me being someone who loves data and looking at data, it was great to get the data loggers and to get a wealth of information on hives around the island. But we had to ask ourselves what we would do with that quantity of data to assist beekeepers in making more informed decisions in how they manage their hives. So the general objective of this presentation is to just give a brief overview of some of the analysis that could be done with 1 year's worth of data from one hive, and see the possible conclusions we could arrive at once we get sufficient data to justify our conclusions. Let me move the next slide. So in a normal managed hive, there are different factors you would manipulate to increase either your productivity of honey or whatever other products you want from the hive, right? In the middle here, you would have your queen presence and performance, the in-hive products, the behavior and physiology of your bees, the demography of your bees, the disease and infestation in your colony, and these are affected by environmental drivers, your beekeeping management practices, and your resource provision to that colony. And then your colony would give you the specific outputs you are looking for. So there are many factors that one could use to model the response variables in a managed hive. This figure basically summarizes the colony attributes. So the colony attributes are in blue, the external drivers in green, and the colony outputs you expect to get in orange. Now, I'm going to run through the next couple of slides because they basically give you an idea of the variables one could manipulate to affect the outcome you want from your colony. So for example, your resource unit, this would be what was presented before. The sources of nectar, your pollen, etc. In the whole systems approach and management to things, everything that is out there for the bees to get. Now, while I run through these factors, while I run through these factors, I would like you to think, especially the beekeepers out there, to think of how would you take one of these variables, what technology you would use to measure it, and the frequency and accuracy you would use to measure any one of these parameters. So if we go on to the next one. The behavior and physiology of your bees. There are different factors that would affect how your bees behave, both inside the colony and once it gets outside the colony. Again, the demography. You look at factors, just let me, because the screen is too far. What happens to the eggs when they mutate to larvae? Your adult bees, what happens to your drones, your foragers, the nurse bees, your queen bee, of course. And I know Richard would stick on the physiology of the queen because most people would debate that the queen is the most important element or the most important bee inside your hive. So there are factors around the queen that would also affect the given output you're looking for. So if we move on to the next one, your queen presence and performance. How much is your queen laying? How good is she at defending the hive, controlling the hive, etc.? The reproductive system of that queen. How would you go and measure how big is her capacity to hold sperm from drones she mates with, right? So if we continue along, the colony outputs. What outputs would you get from the colony? Now, most people would be interested in the honey, right? But as we've heard throughout this week, there are other products you could get from a colony. So if you were to go out there and measure or use a specific type of technology to measure, for example, honey produced in your hive, how frequently would you do that? And what technology would you use? The next one. We look at the in-hive products again. These are also affected by your food stock and your non-food stock, right? So you could get products that could be used for food and byproducts that you don't consume. And your beekeeping management practices. As mentioned earlier, any beekeeper would probably go in and manage or attempt to manage some of the conditions within the colony, right? So you may have a hands-off approach if you, for example, using a Perone hive or a log, where you wouldn't manipulate or handle the bees as much as you would for a next type of system, for example, a Langstroth hive, where you would go and do your inspections. But the management really depends on the beekeeper. So there are decisions that the beekeeper would make that will ultimately affect the end product coming from the hive. So, and also we have the environmental variables. Unlike the variables that the beekeeper could manipulate, the environmental variables are less controllable. But the environmental variables play a very important part in the outputs you would get from your hive. That's the environment. So we come back to the same figure we started off with, right? In summary, we could revisit the diagram in detail and detail some of the factors that are more readily measurable given the technologies that we already have. So if we're looking at, for example, the beekeeping management practices, right? You may want to class yourself either as a hobby beekeeper, a non-beekeeper, an expert beekeeper, elderly, someone with more experience, etc. Right? At some point, you may introduce queens to your hive. You may try different types of hives, like a production system, whether you go for an 8-frame, a 10-frame Langstroth, whether you use a Perone hive, whether you use a top bar, whether you use a Warri hive, right? And there are different management techniques you could use that would aid in, again, achieving your final product. So here, okay, I was supposed to get some red bars flying in that would have indicated the variables we were actually able to measure, and those we were able to measure with the data loggers from the annual system. So basically, the objective of the analysis was to use multivariate analysis to model possible explanatory variables that may explain honey production in a hive. And right? So in the methodology, I conducted all the statistical analysis using our programming, statistical language and environment. The study period was from the 24th of June 2019 to the 5th of July 2020. And the values for each parameter was averaged to obtain a daily mean, and then we use a period of 7 days, which would be your weekly value. Wherever there was data missing, we interpolated using a polynomial spline. And prior to statistical analysis, we did all the normal procedures you would probably do with treating a time series. So we basically had a time series of daily mean values for about 32 parameters. And we run a time series analysis on those variables to try and pick out which variables would correlate with the weight of the hive. Now, we only used one hive that had a scale attached to it, so we also had continuous measurements of the weight of that hive over the period of time. And yeah, that's it. So without going into too much of the technical details, which we plan on putting out a peer-reviewed paper where you would get all the technical details in terms of the statistical analysis, we use basically 3 groups of explanatory variables. The ones in red indicate the variables we derived from the data logging system. So as Richard mentioned, you would get humidity of the colony, you would get the brood temperature. So I took it a bit further and I looked at the daily maximum and the daily minimum value of hive humidity and hive on the brood temperature. The system also comes with an environmental unit that was able to give us the rainfall and temperature in your apiary, and the response variable was the weight of the hive. We use the weight as a surrogate for honey production, right? But if you realize in the management, you have the number of supers, the depth of the supers, the exposure of the hive, the presence of a queen excluder, and the removal of frames. So basically, where you added on supers during the honey flow, and then you either made splits that would decrease the weight of the hive, or you removed a super during the non-flow season. For the bee colony variables, we also, we discussed the temperature and the brood already, and we also included some environmental variables, like the daily maximum temperature, the minimum temperature, mean rainfall, relative humidity, wind speed, and also sunshine hours. So I'm going to, before I continue into the results, I would like to depart from the normal routine and present some of the limitations, because given that most beekeepers would know that there is some seasonal effect in the data, and we only use 1 year's worth of data, we would have missed out on the seasonal trend that would affect the time series analysis. So we expect there to be a cyclical trend in the honey production. The empirical data for the extracted honey, again, we use the weight of the hive as a surrogate for the amount of honey produced, but we did not measure the amount of honey produced or weight. And then, yeah, the weight of the hive as a surrogate. So here you have a graph, for example, of the hive humidity. And the pink in the upper graph, you would have where we had erroneous data. So we had to use that as either missing data, or we could not have used the values obtained from the data logger. So in the bottom graph, you would realize that there are interpolated values that are in pink, and that's why we did the spline interpolation. In the following graph, you have the time series of the weight of the hive. And this basically shows you the general trend and where we had missing values for scale data from the loggers. And the next graph, as is customary with time series analysis, we did a decomposition of the weight of the hive. So you could see whether they observed the trend, the seasonal, and the random variations within the time series during the study period. And what's interesting is that during the random variables, you would note that it normally coincides with either a dip or a rise in the the weight of the hive. And this is when you either had a split or an addition or removal of a hive super, according to the notes that the annual system had for that hive. So this is just some samples of the trended values for hive humidity, the maximum hive humidity, the minimum hive humidity, the brood temperature, the daily mean hive humidity, the daily mean brood temperature, and the daily maximum brood temperature. So when we run this through our analysis, the minimum maximum analysis, multifactorial analysis, the MAFA, we were able to conclude that based on the preliminary results, that the weight of the hive correlated to the hive humidity, that is the daily mean, the maximum and the minimum values, the brood temperature, the day length, how many sunshine hours you got during that day, and the daily amount of rainfall recorded in the environment. But we should take this data with a grain of salt because, again, the data is limited to 1 year. Ideally, if we had 5 years or the more amount of years we have of data, it would increase the confidence we could place in the results obtained. So this is just an example of what we could do with the log data. And here you could see what lessons have been learned. Because we have the log data, it gives us a tremendous amount of data. You have hourly data every day for how long the system is on. However, you would also need to collate ancillary data. You need to know what is happening in your hive. What did you do in your hive if you're using a Langstroth hive where you as the beekeeper go in and manipulate? You have to have that data recorded. And it's only then that that information, when you merge it together, will become useful to you, and you will be able to, the data collected will be able to be used to aid the beekeepers in managing the apiaries better. So the lessons learned just from this section, I know Richard has a lessons learned also. So you need to take notes of what you're doing and when you're doing it in the hive. And you need to constantly check the data that is being logged to make sure that the values you get are not erroneous and something didn't go wrong with the sensors. Again, you need to, if you put in loggers in a hive, it would be best to disturb it as minimally as possible. Multiple data sources are needed, and the most important thing you need to do, even if you didn't have a data logger, is to keep accurate records, right? And that is very crucial because I'm sure I see Marcus here, and as the extension officer, if we were to ask most beekeepers how much honey they produced over the last 5 years, people will give you a figure of their head. They will not be able to tell you, well, this hive gave me that amount of honey during this month, etc., etc. Although that information is useful for scientific purposes, you would need more accurate data and more accurate data recording. So with that, I thank you, and I pass it on to Richard for...
So let's switch back to the other slide, please.
And should anyone...
We'll do concluding results at the end.
Yeah. So you could go ahead and change. But if you have any questions, we'll leave it to the end after Richard's presentation. And I guess we could have joint... Conclusion. And we could have a joint answering of questions.
Yes. Okay, so where are we? Hive monitors, lessons learned. One of the things, some of the sites we found were loaded with too many monitors. Based upon the amount, as Kurt rightly said, you're going to get data. We're getting 24 data points every day. No. So, yeah?
24 by 12.
24 by 12. So it's a humongous amount of data that we were capturing over a large spectrum of hives. So it wasn't really, we could reduce the amount of hives per apiary. As we also indicated, it's important to check the monitors and download the data every month, even if there are no alerts. Connectivity between the server, sometimes we had intermittent connectivity between the server and the gateway unit that uploads the data to the cloud. So it's something that has been a challenge at some times, and that's the reason sometimes we've got these data breaks in our data. Cost of monitors, the batteries. The cost of the monitors themselves and the batteries are quite cost prohibitive. And we found that our rain gauge that came with the system was not very reliable. So we probably need to, in the future, we invest in a more efficient one on site. There needs to have secondary data, a secondary environmental data source for validation of monitoring data. And we need, as we indicated, there needs to be notes and ancillary data is required. So I'm going to skip the lessons learned, and I'll come back to that in a little bit because we basically did a lot of that already. And I want to push on, as we're running out of time, I want to push on and talk about the HiveKeep app. The HiveKeep app, as we indicated before at our opening ceremony, was developed out of India. It was very spontaneous act. Jose Lewis of India and Loretta, we were just talking about doing our presentation, getting a presentation from India to be integrated in this Congress. And from talking over the 2 months period, we said, hey, Jose said, hey, let's develop an app. And we made it, in a space of 2 months, we were able to create an app. And it's fantastic, and I think that's one of the greatest outputs from this whole Congress series, I find, is that the creation of that. So let's talk about this app. The app was developed in India by a startup called Leopard Tech. The app seeks to better integrate record keeping by keepers and capture climatic data and record the appearance of seasonal forage. Integrate remote technical support and administration management to pools of beekeepers. So in other words, a lot of the things that Kurt was talking about that needs to be captured, we took a lot of our lessons learned from our hive monitoring exercise, and we say, hey, what are we missing? And we said, we plugged it, we said, let's plug the things that we're missing, where the gaps are, let's plug it into this app so we can capture this information. And then we looked at, there's a lot of projects, especially like Mr. Romulus, he funds a lot of beekeeping projects. And once these beekeeping projects are let loose, it's very difficult to track what's happening with these beekeeping projects as the grantor. And as well as if you are maybe like me, I've been a facilitator on a number of projects. Once my time is up, it's very difficult for me to keep in communication with all these projects. So one of the things we integrated into this app was the ability, there's a back-end administrative section. So all the data that is captured, you can have clusters of beekeepers or a project, and you can have that project assigned, and you are able now to go into see, well, what is Harry doing with his bees over the last month? And just by flicking through the records, you can see where Harry is, what he's been doing, how much honey is available for sale, or if he's been totally delinquent in his hive monitoring, or in his hive inspection, sorry, and we need to send in somebody to assist him. We can pick up the phone, call him, hey, Harry, what's happening? You haven't been to your bees for 3 weeks. Oh, I broke my leg, or some silly excuse happens. And, okay, we can deploy somebody to assist Harry with looking after his bees. So these are some of the things we can do from back-end administration. So some of the aspects of when you're conducting a hive, this is that data it captures. Your standard hive inspection, Any disease and treatments you apply to your hive, you can log it into the system. Any honey you harvest, you can weigh and log it into the system. Any feed and nutrition that you need to give your bees, you can log it, plug it into the system. Queen replacement, and if you need to reset the colony for any particular reason, you can all do that from the app. And this is just an example of a hive inspection and some of the fields that you will capture during the process of doing a hive inspection. So all of the system generates QR codes which you can place on each of your hives. So when you're doing an inspection, you just scan a QR code and it will pull up the records. It will automatically pull up the correct record set, and you can start plugging in data for that particular hive in question. The HiveKeep app, what are the advantages? Provides beekeepers with a powerful tool to keep detailed records of their hive inspections. Beekeepers can photograph anomalies and track them, remote support and review per hive inspections, collect and track terrestrial data, and the beekeeper is no way restricted in his manipulations of hives. So unlike with the hive monitoring system, you're kind of restricted. With this, it's not really taking any internal data. It's just what you come and take on your inspection. So you can do whatever you want and just log it. Disadvantages is 100% on the beekeeper collecting and inputting accurate data. And two, you have to develop a discipline to collect the data and log it. If without those things, it's a pointless exercise. So just as anything else, garbage in, garbage out. So what are our conclusions? Integrating technology into apiary does not mean less work for the beekeeper. It means more efficient work and possibly even more work, because you're now getting more intuitive data which will trigger a response from you as a beekeeper. IT directly addresses the major issues of beekeepers, thereby helping a beekeeper to improve productivity. So, for example, one of the things you can set in the hive monitors is you can set minimum and maximum temperatures. So if you see one of your hives the temperature is continually dropping over a period of a week, it gets to below 30 degrees centigrade, anybody can tell me what that means? Anybody? If your hive, if the average hive temperature is between 30.8 degrees Celsius and say 37 degrees Celsius, if it drops below that, what's possibly wrong? Anybody got a suggestion? Anyone? Beekeepers. If you see the temperature of your hive is dropping, what possibly could that mean? No one has an idea. Okay. If you have to be in this range to have a there you go. Question from the internet. Queen has stopped laying. Fantastic. There's the answer. So if you see your temperature drops out of the preferred zone, it means your queen is either stopped laying or your colony is queenless. So if you go and do your bees every 14 days, and that between the day after you last left, the queen exploded or the queen died, or maybe when you're doing your hive inspection, you killed the queen, you didn't know it. The hive monitor can pick up the information and tell you, but hey bro, you don't have a laying queen inside your hive because the temperature is dropping. And you can make an intervention quickly. Either pull out a queen, drop it in the box, or take a queen cell, drop it in the box. These are things that you can do to help yourself. Monitors and app should work together in tandem for greater success. So if you put these two tools together, you would have accurate data as to what's from the beekeeper, from his hive inspections and what's going on. And from a scientific perspective, you can marry the two data sets together and get a better overall impression of what's happening. Terrestrial information, as well as your hive examination information, as well as the scientific temperature data and humidity which is being collected. So you can have a complete idea of what's happening inside of your hive. Mr. Prosper, Dr. Prosper, would you like to add anything more to that?
No, I think the only thing I would add to that would just be that the information you get from the system would allow you to make more educated guesses as to what's happening within your colony. It probably would not tell you, for example, the bee is dead, but if you know that a drop in temperature is correlated to probably the bee dying, it could be that you left the hive uncovered, for example, right?
Possible to that. Or the sensor dropped out.
Yeah, but it would allow you to make a more educated guess and have a more timely intervention if you are looking at that data and you know what the data, how to interpret what you're seeing.
All right, so I think that concludes our presentation. We'll do a quick question and answers from the audience, and we've got a few questions online. Mr. Dennis, please go ahead.
Lucia. I know this experiment was conducted. What are the benefits of this experiment to the farmer and to the beekeeping fraternity?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I hear the question clearly.
The question I'm asking is that what the benefit of the experiment to the beekeeper and to the beekeeping fraternity?
Go ahead, I'll answer afterwards.
From
scientific.
From my point of view, or from where I stood and where I stand now, if the experiment were to be 100% successful, let's say we're 5 years down the line, right? Mm-hmm. And we get information from the Perone hive and the Langstroth, because one of the variables we wanted to test was which one produced more honey, right? There are arguments that the Langstroth is more productive than the Perone. So if we have enough data, we could substantiate that claim based on the data we have and a log of the data with empirical data, right? It also would help beekeepers by trying to model the key factors that affect, again, if we're looking at honey production, and honey production is our response variable, and we take a surrogate to mean the weight of the hive, right? If we are able, 5 years down the line, to do this statistical analysis, we are able to tell a beekeeper, hey, it doesn't matter if you split your hive 1,000,000 times. At the end of the day, the key variables from a scientific point of view that affect the weight of your scale, the weight of the hive, are X, Y, and Z variables, right? Now, I know you would also have to include some component of local knowledge or traditional knowledge, but there are ways to capture that and integrate that in the analysis of the data so you make a more educated guess as to what variables, what you could do basically to improve on your productivity. It may be honey, it could be queen, it could be the number of queens, it could be whatever variable from that hive you are monitoring on a regular basis throughout the study period.
Ready? All right, so from a beekeeping standpoint, as you know, we are breeders, so I'm a breeder, and we test a lot of the different queens, the queens that we have. So one of the tests we started doing is that we have queens from when we first started the experiment that were from general stock. And then we've started the process of when we swap out the queens to one of our new stock of queens, what the performance was. And we've seen significant improvements in the honey production. However, what we need to do is to continue the assessment to see when we swap out the queen again, or we replace the queen with the same line and we come back with a test again, how well does that line perform on a continuous basis? So it's part of an ongoing scientific experiment. It's not, you're not going to get the results of it every day or every 6 weeks. But as the time goes, as our crosses for our queens improve, or we want to, to monitor, it will give us data as to how well the queens are we producing, what the benchmark is. So the benchmark for the queens that we're producing, this will in the long term we'll be able to say, well, look, this is the 2-year or 3-year study of the queens that we've produced of this line. This is the honey yields it's done. We'll have statistical information on varroa mite, on wax moth, on climate conditions, how well it coped with heavy rains, and so forth. And we'll be able to have a full cadre of information to defend product A vis-a-vis product B. So I think in the long run, probably by the end of next year, we should be in that realm to give you that kind of information.
Well, my biggest concern was, I mean, the cost of this equipment and vis-a-vis the bottom line for the farmer and the production, because there are a lot of visual ways of doing things that is quite accurate. I mean, scientifically, yes, but as an industry, I believe we have to me, the focus should more be on what kind of information we can assist the farmer with, not information just for information sake, you know. What can we do that? What can we utilize the information? How can we assist the farmer?
Well, see, that's one of the problems, just looking at not relying on scientific data. This is the problem that we have in this industry. All of the speakers that have preceded us have come with scientific proof to prove what they're saying. So we can no longer function in a world without scientific validation. We need to have that validation scientifically. I need to be able to say, John and I made a line of queens, and this is what we expect when we pass this queen on to somebody. This is the yield we expect to give, and this is the proof to back it up.
Well, I mean,
so when you as a farmer take that, you can take it in good faith, because it comes with scientific evidence to back it up.
Just let me interject. Also, just to add on to your point, which is why when I was showing the different variables that affect your product from your colony, I asked you to think of the different technologies you could use and how you would measure that. It is true, a beekeeper may take a normal scale and weighs the hive every week. But at the end of the day, right, he has to be able to basically strengthen his argument with some sort of data. It could be that he uses traditional knowledge, and Richard and I have had that tussle where you say, well, I just know based on what I observe. Yeah, that is good, but you cannot tell everyone, I observed this for the last 2 years. You understand? So at the end of the day, yes, we may use data loggers, we may use a manual scale, but it all requires some sort of scientific, accurate data being recorded in whatever way or fashion that would, at the end of the day, result in a consensus that is backed by some sort of evidence, and is, I hate to say the word evidence-based, but is really and truly some sort of decision that you're taking that is evidence-based. It cannot be that you go to the farmer and you tell them now, this is what's happening, without that sort of evidence, without that data to back you up. So we could go the nice fancy way. You could get a thermal imaging camera and take the temperature of the hive from outside. What does it really translate to at the end of the day if you only do it once a month? You understand? What conclusions can you make from that data which you have collected? Which is what I've tried to basically use the data we have obtained to show where we can go with the analysis and the type of conclusions we could make. It may not assist the farmer in his day-to-day management of the hive, if he has an infestation with wax moth, if there's no pollen or there's no nectar flow, it may not be able to assist him, but we could tell him at the end of the day, if you want to increase your honey production, based on the data we have, probably a Peruvian hive is best, because we have shown that in these, I'm just saying, under these circumstances, we have obtained more honey, and this is by X%. It wouldn't be just, yeah, I get more honey based on my observations.
I can also want to add to that as well. I mean, if you're looking for really simplistic things that the system can do for you, I mean, if I've got a hive positioned at point X, and I log into the system and I see the weight gain is like 4 kilos or 5 kilos in 24 hours, it tells me, okay, click, there's a honey flow happening at point Z. I've got maybe 50 hives at that position, okay. Most of them don't have supers yet, okay, so when I go down there, I need to bring down 50 supers and at least 300-400 frames, so I can load up enough ammo at that location to collect all the nectar. All right, and if I can sit down there and I can say, okay, I see the weight's kind of plateaued, nothing's really happening, okay, I can probably decide to go down there and harvest and, you know, break down, do what I'm doing, or I can if I'm at point X and I say, well, point Z is now starting to kick off, okay, I can maybe, that's plateaued out, I can harvest that honey and I can reposition those bees and put them on point X and take advantage of the flow. If you want the most simplistic advantage you could get from the system, I mean, that's how you could, if that's what you want, you can get that. But I think we should try to get some, we've got a lot of questions from the audience online, so I think we should try to revert. Yes, ma'am? Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, nice presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would like to know, do you necessarily need a monitor to have access to the app? Because we know it's expensive.
The app will work on a regular, and this is an iPhone, but it will work on a regular Android phone. That's the beauty of the app. The app will work independently on a regular Android phone, and it will allow you to start collecting your data on a simple app on your phone.
And second question, is there a cost to the app?
We haven't rolled out the app in its fullest form. We're still looking at it in its beta stages right now. We'll probably do an official, we're still trying to put it in the hands of as many beekeepers in a controlled circumstance for us to get some more workability data. We've done over the last 3 months, 2 months, there's been about 6 or 7 upgrades, server upgrade, and Mr. Romulus and I should I divulge that, sir? Is that opportune? Yeah, myself and Mr. Romulus, we had the engineers from Microsoft that presented at the People's Parliament. We had a long discussion with them, and we're looking at meeting with all the various players so far in our data collection, Anya, and the gentleman at Leopardec in India, and seeing if Microsoft can help to bridge a gap between some of the issues that we have, or bridge a gap into integrating the Hive monitor data so we can access it in the back end of the app. So there is a lot of things that are happening ongoing with this project, and I think it's going to be very dynamic. One of the best things, I think, we got the regional project coming out starting soon, starting in the new year, and the app will be one of the backbone applications, or the backbones of the regional project, to make sure with the various administrators of the project, they can sit down in the office, or they can sit down in another country if they're working with other beekeepers, and they can still keep a track on the work they just did in another island, and how the beekeepers are performing in that other island since they left. So the app is going to be, once it's rolled out, it's going to be a very, very, very powerful tool. At this time, I don't really see there being a cost to it. And if there is a cost, it'd be a very minimal cost. And whatever way we do it, I think we need to, before we put a cost figure on it, as it's going to be part of the regional project, we need Mr. Romulus and the various regional stakeholders to really put their 10 cents into it and how best they want to manage the rollout of that product or how the costs will be integrated. Mr. Romulus might be very generous and buy a licensing fee for the entire Caribbean and everybody could use it for free. Or each of the different countries may have their own prerogative. But as I said, at this time, we're rolling it out. We're still beta testing it. You know, if you would like to beta test it, we could give you a copy for you to try it. We would greatly like to get your input, and the guys at Lepotech would definitely want to get your input as an extension officer as to how the app performs for you.
Okay, that's a good idea, and congrats on the new app. But I believe we should not forget one of our key stakeholders, the farmers, and realize there are different level of competence of farmers, and some of them may need a breakdown, an explanation. Because I think the data collected, the initiative is good, but we always need to remind them the benefits of these things, so we need to come to them and
I mean, as I said, the app is there to be used. I mean, it's a tool that those that wish to use the tool, they can use the tool. If you don't want to use the tool, don't use the tool. You don't have to use the tool. It's a tool. It's like there are many different saws. I may prefer this, a tenon saw, to a different type of, I might like a hand saw, he might like an electric saw. That's what works for you, go for it. As I said, so it's not a matter of, we can give you the tool and show you how to use the tool. If you wish to use a tool, use a tool. It's not compulsory. We are not a government. You're the government. I have no interest in imposing my ideas on anybody. What I can share with you is I can share with you my ideas, and I can share with you the tools that I use. Whether you not use the tools I have on offer is up to you. I'm not the government. You guys are.
True. So
I'm going to take a few questions now from the internet audience, because I think we've been neglecting them for a little while. So I'll take it from the bottom and I'll work my way up. Other apicultural associations. I assume you're Kamala Ryan. I assume you're referring to if the app will be available to other apicultural associations. Yes, it would be once we roll it out throughout the Caribbean. Robert Woodsui. Where can we access the recordings of the proceedings? Everything is on YouTube and Facebook. We'll have a link on our website where you can get all of that information. Would you be able to send it out for beta testing to other beekeepers in the Caribbean Islands? Yes, we will. I will probably be doing that once I discuss that with the guys at Lepotech. We'll be able to get it available to them. I wish Jose will be making a presentation tomorrow morning, so maybe he may be able to give you some more information on that when we could roll it out to other beekeepers in the Caribbean. Peter Mitchell, I don't believe the monitors are very hobbyist, but it provides an avenue for extension officers and other interested individuals to monitor hives and provide better help to beekeepers. Great point, Peter. Vern Gloucester, scientifically, we can have better cross-referencing with the outer regions in order to enhance beekeeping realm globally. Great point also. All right, I'm going to switch across to the group. What's the relationship between external and internal hive temperature? Kurt, you want to do that one, or should I do that one? What's the difference? Okay. What's the relationship between internal and external to hive temperature? The bees will maintain, as we said, a constant temperature between a set range. Between what we found so far in St. Lucia is 30.08 degrees Celsius and 34.6, I think, or 35 degrees Celsius, if I just remember off the top of my head. So we know that the bees operate in that set range. So the majority of the time, even though the sun is shining outside, the temperature in the hive is much hotter than what is outside. And if the temperature outside is too hot, the bees will cool the fan by fanning and circulating the airflow. So what it tells us is that regardless of the temperature is hot or cold, the bees will maintain a set range, temperature range within the hive. Hugh Smith, yes, it was the same. Okay, so I think they tried this system in Jamaica, probably one of the earlier models, and they had problems with water penetration inside of the system. Actually, Hugh, there's actually a new generation which just came out, which we just deployed to Trinidad. And the old versions, the ones we had a hive monitor box that sat on the back of it that communicated with a gateway, and you had wires you had to feed inside of the box. The new system is a small hexagonal disc that does everything. You rest it on top of the hive frames, and it connects via Bluetooth to the gateway box. And before you used to have had to have a scale connected to a gateway box. Now the scales, you can have as many scales in the apiary without having corresponding gateways, because everything communicates via Bluetooth to the gateway box. Are you also going to speak about a system from India? Yes, we did. Regarding the HiveKeep app, does the system have any way of integrating with IoT sensors, remote monitoring, now or in the future? What's the cost? As I said, the HiveKeep app, we're working on it. We're working with Microsoft to look at further integration between the two key suppliers, two key vendors, and see if they can find a common solution between them. The cost for the Hive app at this time is free. The cost for the gateways, the Hive monitor systems, if you put your email address in the system, I can send you a link to their website and you can grab all that information there. Does the beekeeper own the data? Can they download it to the hard drive? Yes, they can. Great presentations thus far. Thank you. Can you kindly share the presentation slides and recording if possible? Once again, you can get that on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll put links on our website. Also, could I get information about the ANYA system? We'll post information on our website. I hope, yeah, okay, farmers from Barcelona. Question, does your app offers API interface? We're looking to that opportunity, Andreas. Could we add customized app according to the needs? We are looking at that. Once we roll out the app to you guys in Trinidad and in Brasso Seco, we'll obviously take input from you guys. I think Dr. Mahabir will be giving you access to the app in Brasso Seco shortly, and then you'll be able to give us recommendations on what we can change, what we can do to improve the app. Yes, I understand. The data collect. Okay, yes, I understand. Data collection is very useful, but can more be done in supporting farmers practically and financially? Financial support. You need to help us to approach your government for that. I can't help you in that regards. There are many grant agencies, Jeff SGP, there are many different agencies that do give assistance. Once you've got a viable project, they can possibly help you. Have you considered solar energy to fuel a monitoring pack? Yes, we have, and that's one of the discussions that we've had with Microsoft in fabricating that for us. Whew, that's a lot of questions, man. That's a lot of questions. Okay, CYNA, YouTube, blah, blah. Okay, thanks, guys, for posting those things. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. All right, I think we have kind of pushed the envelope on how to be late, how to be late on a congress, which is kind of normal for beekeeping congresses. We're supposed to go to lunch at 12:30. It's now 12:28. We were supposed to do 4 country papers from 11:30 to 12:30, which we have not done. I don't know if we can do via show of hands in the group, or the presenters that are from Guyana, Dominican Republic, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Barbados, if you would allow us to proceed after lunch, or do you want us to proceed now? I think from my own logic and looking at the crowd here, that we should proceed after lunch with all the country papers, so we just make one big bang of it. Yes, sir? Yeah, yes, what we'll probably do, we'll shorten lunch. Instead of having a whole hour, we'll do it like 45 minutes. Can we see what the responses are like that online? Everybody give us if you're in keeping with that? Yes, thanks, please share. Hugh Miller. Shorten lunch to 30 minutes, yeah. 30-minute lunch, guys. 30 minutes, yep. Yeah, Gladstone, okay, thanks for that, Mr. Gladstone. Yes, Shada, 30 minutes for lunch. Okay, so it looks like the ayes have it. Lunch is not here yet. Oh my God. I'm sorry? Okay, so I've been informed by my technical team that they need to take a lunch break now. So they're the final decision makers. They're forcing us into a lunch break. No? Okay, well, we're taking somebody's got to take the blame, Richmond. Come on. Be nice, man. Be nice. Somebody's...
In our small initiative, we managed to develop a beehive monitoring system in which beekeepers can keep track of the beehives around the year and can share the information with expert beekeepers in the group. The centralized information repository can help the beekeepers connect with buyers locally and over internet, where e-commerce is possible without the involvement of any middleman or agents. Our aim is to ensure better income for the beekeepers and pure honey for the consumers with the assistance of technology.
as you can see, we have some brood, some capped brood, and we have some open brood there, or wet brood.
Okay, my name is Richard Matthias. I'm the president of the Ianola Apiculture Collective. This particular location at the Casa del Vega in Vigi, where we have our interpretation center located. It was originally conceptualized as a project for tourism, so we could incorporate work with the cruise ship passengers to, when they come briefly to St. Lucia for an hour or so, that they could come experience the bees, experience some different flavors of honey, different types of food cooked with honey, and get a little bit of the history of apiculture in the Caribbean and especially St. Lucia. And then we also have some hives here which they can do a hive inspection and see the queen and the drones and the worker bees and taste the honey directly from the hive. So because of COVID, we had to adapt a little bit, and we started to pursue doing local training and holding seminars for local beekeepers and persons that are interested in getting into beekeeping. The bees we have in there are very nice, gentle bees. We've specifically bred them for this location. We've looked at the characteristics of all of our different hives. This still works, it's in bad condition. These are a number of general citizens of St. Lucia that have interested in getting to learn a little bit more about beekeeping before they start making financial investment into beekeeping. We found that a lot of people they hear about beekeeping, they hear about the potential revenue that can be derived from producing honey, but there's not much background given into this is, it's not just the bees in the box and the bees do their thing. You have to manage it as in it's livestock. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts, a lot of things you need to learn. So we developed this 6-week course to allow people who have an interest in the subject to give them some exposure, take them out on a few field trips, come to a few of our apiaries.
That's a crown bud, so we pop the crown bud off, smoke.
And really give them the technical insight to the technical support they really need to know before they make the plunge. So before you take out a couple $100 or $1,000 or more and you invest in bees, and then you give up after 6 months, that's money down the drain. Where if you get a gradual introduction and you can gauge if this is what you really want to do.
This is a cell builder, and a cell builder is saturated with nurse bees. And nurse bees, because nurse bees produce secretion called royal jelly.
My name is Mujahid, and I represent an organization called ASLAM, which stands for Association of St. Lucian Muslims. We respect nature as Muslims, and we want to find a way to live in harmony with nature, so it was just natural for us to gravitate towards like bees.
My name is Denzel Louis, and I'm from Marvin Possum. Well, I've learned a lot of new things about the different species and where to set up the hives and how to set them up in the proper spots.
In this area here, we have some 12-hour larvae. So this is going to be our grafting frame.
Apiculture is, it's all about the numbers. Beekeeping is about the numbers. The more colonies of hives you have, is the more honey potentially you can produce. So you obviously, if you're a honey producer, you want to have as many hives as possible. So the equipment will cost a little bit.
So we just look for the queen again quickly. She will be walking, so we'll be looking across the frame just to try to spot her.
Where you can grow easily with bees is that once you've got your first 5 or 6 colonies of bees, you can multiply those colonies into more bees as time goes by. With good management techniques, you can do that. So once you buy your first 5 colonies, technically you don't need to buy any more colonies after that.
Okay, my name is Jacques Mather. A new upcoming beekeeper. Me being a chef, I like to know where my products come from. I like to know where the honey comes from, how it's produced, what goes on in producing honey. So that's what I'm here to learn.
I find it's really opened up my mind. I was only looking at bees as something, a pest or something to sting me. But now I actually see like opportunity with it. So I don't know if I'll go into it right away, but it was an eye-opener for me, and it's probably another direction you could take.
It's going to be a cost. You have to buy boxes, you have to buy frames, you have to get the different things to manage your bees, to keep your bees healthy. All right, so there are a number of different things along the way that you would need that will clock up the money.
Why did you think you will get into honey production?
I think it's because it's a good secondary income for myself, and there's also good practices you can learn from it as well.
So now that you're getting this deeper appreciation of what's involved, is it something that you think you'd like to do for a while?
Oh yes, I think this is something that I can easily fit into anything that I'm doing. It's something that's quick, easy, and when you're in the right community, people will always come and help you, no matter what you do.
Only going into bee farming for honey will not make you a millionaire. You actually have to, yeah, that's the most important thing. You actually have to look at the other aspects of having bees to actually benefit from it.
That and a lot of other stuff I've learned here. We also the practical aspect of it. Today we'll be doing like grafting. We'll be grafting queens, like basically making more queens. Yeah, it's really good. It's a good thing, and I would encourage anybody to look into apiculture. Yeah, it's profitable, but you shouldn't do it for the money. You should do it because of the passion and the benefits it has for the environment.
Well, as you can see from our project here, we got a lot of assistance from GFSGP. We've got a lot of help through them over the years, and they helped a lot of apiculture projects in St. Lucia. You know, there's a lot of awareness, and as long as people are aware of the importance of bees into the biodiversity of the country, it's all good. So I mean, the more people are aware of bees and they think about bees, and the less they use harmful chemicals like gramaxone and touchdown, which can have been proven to have diverse effects on the bees globally, we're all in good stead. So it's important that if you want to look at your natural ecosystems, your rainforests, your mangroves, your natural forests, it's very important that bees are there to help pollinate these trees, these plants, to help keep them going, because bees they agitate them, they force the plants to grow, they force them to flower.
Immediately after this, we're heading somewhere else, Chabot. What exactly is going to be happening there?
In Chabot, we have one of our breeding facilities in Chabot, and we're going to be doing probably making some queens in Chabot. Also, some of the guys, part of the training is to welcome, produce, and wax foundation stuff. So we're going to look at a few different aspects of the apiculture business and to see, you know, shed some different light. In this capilla here, we're full of drone semen, and we will have a queen position right here. We collect drones, we put them in this bag, and then we squeeze them and we harvest and store.
We pull them up, and as you can see, we have some queen cells developing.
Our motto is more than just honey, so we're not just interested in honey production. As I stated before, we are breeders. We focus a lot on breeding really good quality top queens.
So hello guys, my name is John Frederick. I am the Vice President of the Ionola Apiculture Collective, and part of my role is to graft beautiful queens for the Ionola Apiculture Collective and St. Lucian beekeepers. Okay, so I think we found the frame of the correct age. In this area here, we have some 12-hour larva. So this is going to be our grafting frame. So grafting is the process by which you pick up a 12-hour larva and you place it onto a small puddle of royal jelly. To graft, these are the tools that you'll be needing. You'll be needing royal jelly to prime your cells. You will be needing the cell cups and the cell cup holders. You'll be needing a grafting tool. This is a Chinese grafting tool. My preferable one is a brush, pin brush. It's important that you prime your cells. You could prime it with royal jelly. Some people prime it with water. Just a little dab, just to keep the larva moist.
Come in. Don't miss now.
So after this process, so we then take the bar and then we place it into the cell builder. So those cells, they would have to be packed with royal jelly, because that's the food that the queens would live on with survival. So we place it down into the cell builder. So the bees will start polishing up the cells and then they'll start caring for the larvae that we've placed in the cells. So with our feeder on, after 24 hours we go in, we take out the bar and we put it into the cell finisher. The cell finisher is another hive.
Another hive?
Yes, with a queen in it. So it's a queen-right colony. The cell builder is a queenless colony. So we just look for the queen again quickly. Just to be very careful with her, not to squash her.
How do you determine where the queen is?
Well, she would be walking, so we'll be looking across the frame just to try to spot her. If she's not there, then we just continue and brush her.
She's marked as well.
And she has a dot on her back, a blue dot. So, and then after the sensitive stage, then we take the cells from the cell finisher and we put it into the incubator. That's a yellow box.
That's from our graph we did a few days ago. Why do we put them in these cages? Go in the incubator.
They don't escape when they're hatched.
Okay, and what will they do when they escape?
They'll kill each other.
That's it. So we put them in these rollers to stop them from killing the other queens. And if you notice, the cells are got nice indentation on them, so they really went to work on those queens and they cared for them. We've got another queen that's hatched. Come on, girlie. She's not as big as the first one. So you guys have got a special treat today. You're seeing actually freshly hatched virgin queens. Right. I mean, we were there like 30 minutes ago. We don't keep them here more than 2 or 3 days. So this project we have from Jeff, one of the outputs from the project is that we're looking at higher value products. For the last 3 years, we've been working and producing pain relief cream, which uses bee venom in it. And we've also been working, one of the things that this project has sponsored, Jeff SGP has helped us with, is that we're going to be producing commercial medical grade bee venom for export into Europe and the United States. So if some of you may have noticed in the last few days, there have been research in Australia where people have found aggressive forms of cancer can be treated with bee venom. This is stuff we knew for many years, and this is why we pursued the field. Those of you who've been looking at COVID, there's been some talk about COVID could be cured by using bee venom and propolis. But there are other areas where you can use bee venom for. I mean, there's AIDS research that they've used bee venom in. They've used it in the treatment of Lyme disease. It's one of the main only cures, really, or to help the people to have a manageable lifestyle. And one of the things that we've also been looking at closely is because of climate change, the yields of honey have fluctuated, especially in the Caribbean, maybe not so much in North America and Latin America, where they've got massive agricultural sector that really works hand in glove with their apiculture sector. But we in the Caribbean, we're dependent more on natural forage. So we've seen a lot of changes, a lot of fluctuations based upon the climate change and the changing environment, which has forced us to say, well, we can't bank on honey as we used to before, so we need to look at something else to help us keep our heads above water.